Chapter 607. Chu Yang was indeed going crazy. Ao clan has no reason to deal with me in any case. But of all people, they had come to deal with him. This was tantamount to biting the hand that fed him, regardless of whether it was true or not. The news of Ao Shim being rescued by him had already spread throughout the Jianghu. It would definitely reach their ears, and they would be even more unable to deal with him. It was already too late for him to express his gratitude. Yet he had actually set up an ambush? The minister was instantly enraged. No matter what the other party was thinking, this time, he was determined to teach the other party a lesson. Then he quietly crouched down. In an instant, he retracted all of his life force fluctuations. All of his heartbeat, pulse, and other life force disappeared in an instant. It was as if he was a piece of rotten wood, because the sword spirit was speaking in his mind. There are 3 people talking. What did he say? The first one said, "Why isn't he here yet?" Then the other one said, "Don't tell me he's gone?" The sword spirit said. Chu Yang gritted his teeth and asked, "How was his tone?" The sword spirit said in a deep voice, "It's full of killing intent." Chu Yang snorted heavily in his heart. This group of people was Ao Lang Yun of the Ao clan's detachment. He was the number 2 figure of Ao clan's younger generation apart from Ao Xia Yin. Ao Lang Yun had arrived here with his people after he had dealt a heavy blow to the Tian clan's industry. And he had done so in order to stop King of Hell Chu. Old Third and Old Fourth have already fought with Gu Duxing twice. Old Fifth has also fought with Dong Wushang once, but he managed to escape. There's no news from Fourth Brother, who's trying to intercept GMO Seventh Brother, has already started fighting with Luo Kadi. Luo Kadi is injured and has left. Ao Lang Yun frowned. This means that the information is correct. But why hasn't Big Brother King of Hell Chu arrived yet? Could it be that this fellow has been sightseeing all this time? Beside him were 2 old men in brocade robes. Their eyes shined brightly, and one of them said, "Second young master, there is no need to worry. Just relax and wait a little longer. King of Hell Chu couldn't have passed by here. Or, he might have been delayed by something on the way." Another person said, "However, dealing with King of Hell Chu this time is somewhat inappropriate. We must keep it strictly confidential. Ao clan will be labeled as repaying kindness with enmity if this matter spreads out." Ao Lang Yun snorted in a low voice. Then, he said to his confidant without any reservation, "First, King of Hell Chu is meddling in other people's business. There is a rumor in the Jianghu that King of Hell Chu saved Ao Xia Yin. Whether this matter is true or not, there is no smoke without fire. According to my speculation, it is very likely to be true. This alone is enough for him to be sentenced to death. Secondly, King of Hell Chu may not have saved Ao Xia Yin out of kindness. The Mo clan, the Dong clan, and the other clans are on the opposite side of the alliance. So they bear the brunt of the attack. However, they haven't taken any action since the beginning. Their intention is none other than to let our Ao clan make the first move. Then, they'll sit on the mountain and watch the tigers fight. After that, they'll reap the fruits of our labor. Such an intention is worthy of death." But the news of King of Hell Chu rescuing Ao Xia Yin spread out at this time, and confused everyone. So, Ao clan had a clear target for revenge. This shows that King of Hell Chu and Mo Tianji are in cahoots with each other. Thirdly, King of Hell Chu led the Heavenly Armament Pavilion to destroy the O clan overnight. So, the strength of the Heavenly Armament Pavilion can't be underestimated. The military strength of the Heavenly Armament Pavilion is obvious to all even if they have the help of the Xie clan. So they will become a big threat to us over time, especially now that the Jianghu is in turmoil. And the ambitions of the Heavenly Armament Pavilion are very clear. They must be eliminated or disintegrated as soon as possible. Otherwise, they will become the biggest enemy of our Ao clan once they are fully fledged. They may become the next Black Devil clan. Fourthly, Gu Duxing, Dong Wushang, and the others are outstanding talents of the younger generation. They have great prospects for development. I must have such young experts with potential as my right-hand men, if I want to become the next clan lord. The Jianghu is in chaos now, so it is a God-sent opportunity to subdue them. However, King of Hell Chu is their boss. So how can they change their allegiance if King of Hell Chu doesn't die? Therefore, King of Hell Chu must die. They can be used by King of Hell Chu. So, they can certainly be used by me. Ao Langyun coldly snorted. He then insipidly said, what can King of Hell Chu give them? And I can give them 10 times what King of Hell Chu can give them. In fact, I can give them even more. This is the reason why I want to kill King of Hell Chu. Moreover, King of Hell Chu is the first person I must kill. Ao Langyun insipidly said, you can say that I'm an ungrateful person who bites the hand that feeds me. But, King of Hell Chu must never live in this world. The two old men beside him tightly knitted their brows. They pondered for a while. Then they finally heaved a long sigh. King of Hell Chu had saved Ao Xiayin. So, it was tantamount to setting himself against Ao Langyun. These matters were only Ao Langyun's speculations. But they weren't necessarily false. It seems that King of Hell Chu must die if this is the case. The two old men looked at each other. Then they stopped trying to dissuade Ao Langyun. Ao Langyun smiled and said, I will personally dispatch 100 experts to kill him this time. So King of Hell Chu should feel very proud even if he dies. The two old men forced a smile. Of course, the conversation between them was transmitted to the sword spirit's ears. And through the sword spirit, it was transmitted to Chu Yang's ears. King of Hell Chu's lungs were about to explode in anger. I'm selfish. I want to fight for power and profit. So why should I push all the blame to others? I may be *TCH, but I still want a monument to my chastity. Is there such a beautiful thing in this world? Those big clans are targeting your Ao clan. They are hunting down Ao Xiayin. What does Old Man Guan have to do with this? Old Man Guan was just happy to see this happen. Even Motianji didn't add fuel to the fire, right? Chu Yang's murderous aura soared from his entire body. This made the sword spirit understand. This battle is unavoidable. He sighed softly, be careful. The opposite party has 2 8th grade Emperor level experts. They also have 10 4th or 5th grade Emperor level experts. The remaining 80-odd people are all King level experts. Chu Yang gently nodded. His murderous aura and anger receded like a tide. He regained his calmness. This might be the most arduous battle I've ever had since I started my career. But it's not my style to run away without fighting. Let me kill to stop the killing. I'll chop you ungrateful bastards to death. So what if you're from Ao clan? Aren't your necks made of meat? A burst of cool breeze blew over. Chu Yang's body floated along with the wind. He then entered the dense forest in front of him, like a flash of lightning. This was the place where Ao clan had set up their ambush. This was a dense forest of ancient pines. The dense pines covered the entire sky. Even though it was daytime, and the sun was high up in the sky, the forest of ancient pines was still gloomy and gloomy. It was like a ghost's domain. There seems to be some movement. The two old men in embroidered robes stood beside Ao Langyun. They wrinkled their brows and looked all around. A scream came from the periphery. The sound had come from the south. The complexion of the two men changed. One of them stayed behind, and the other one disappeared from where he was standing. Let's go and take a look, Ao Langyun calmly said. The two men chased after him. They arrived in the direction where the sound had come from. They looked, and couldn't help but feel a chill run down their spines. They saw that a king-level expert of Ao clan was facing outside. His body was off the ground. He was firmly fixed to a pine tree by a pine branch. His body was dead, but his eyes were wide open. His eyes were full of panic and despair. This man's pants had fallen to his feet. They were hanging on the ground. His lower body was completely naked. There was a thin sword mark on his throat. He must have been attacked when he was relieving himself. His throat was cut by a sword. Then he was nailed to the tree by a pine branch. The eyes of that emperor expert flashed as he said in a heavy voice. The other embroidered robed emperor expert stepped forward and carefully examined him. Then he said, "This man has a divine weapon. The cut seems fine, but even his Adam's apple and neck have been cut in half. Moreover, this man's skill isn't lower than a 5th grade king-level expert. Especially, he's an expert in assassination." Yes, Ao Langyun's complexion became serious. He extended his hand and waved. "Everyone pay attention and be on guard. You must intercept and kill this man if you find him." Many people in the shadows agreed at the same time. The two embroidered-robed emperor experts became anxious. They shouted, "Everyone withdraw from your original positions. Immediately change your positions." However, before he could finish speaking, another blood-curdling scream rang out. This time it came from the north. Alas! The embroidered-robed emperor expert stamped his foot. His heart was full of powerlessness. "Second young master, how could you issue an order a moment ago? You should have added 'don't make a sound,' even if you had issued an order. They would have complied if you had issued an order. But this compliance is tantamount to providing targets for the assassins in the dark." It seemed that this embroidered-robed old man had a very high status in the Ao clan. He had dared to reprimand Ao Lang Yun to his face. His tone was tactful, but it was obvious that he was blaming Ao Lang Yun. "Yes, it's my fault." Ao Lang Yun readily accepted the good advice. He bowed his head and admitted his mistake. "I don't know much about this kind of strategy, so I asked Uncle Kai to take full command." This Uncle Kai's name was Kai Xiaocheng. He and Li Changlong were two of the 8 great bodyguards of the Ao clan's clan lord, Ao Tianxing. 4 of these 8 bodyguards had followed Ao Xia Yin. 2 of them had been assigned to Ao Lang Yun, and the other 2 had been assigned to other people. This was also the Ao clan's way of protecting their younger brothers. Kai Xiaocheng wasn't modest. This wasn't the time to be modest. He repeatedly issued orders. "Everyone listen to my order. Leave your original hiding positions. Then slowly gather around the center. Your movements don't need to be fast. But don't make a sound." Then, he slipped away in the direction of the north. There was a big hole in the chest of a king-level expert. He was powerlessly sitting on the ground. He was no longer alive. So ruthless. Li Changlong clenched his teeth and said, "This man clearly had the ability to kill him without making him scream. But he made him scream before he died. This man's ruthlessness and mercilessness can make one's hair stand on end." "Who is this man?" Ao Lang Yun asked. "Could it be King of Helchu?" Kai Xiaocheng and Li Changlong looked at each other and saw the uncertainty in each other's eyes. A rustling sound came from the pine forest. It was the sound of the ambushing experts rushing over. The enemy wouldn't be able to assassinate them silently, as long as they formed a circle around each other. However, screams suddenly resounded one after another at this moment. Kai Xiaocheng bellowed loudly. Then he shook his arms and flew in the direction of the sound like a big bird. Chapter 608. He saw that 4 people were lying on the ground hundreds of feet away. Their bodies were covered in blood. They had been cut into 8 pieces. Everyone was looking in the same direction. It was obvious that the enemy had attacked them from behind. For people had been killed in one blow. The smell of blood was faintly spreading in the black pine forest. It was close to the afternoon. The wind was blowing in the pine forest and issued a rustling sound. The branches of the black pine forest were swaying gently. Countless shadows were swaying on the ground. It was daytime, but it had added a gloomy feeling to it. Kai Xiaocheng glared at them. Then he suddenly shouted like a spring thunder. "Who's behind this? Come out and fight with me if you're Han." His voice spread far and wide like a spring thunder. It shook the dense pine needles on top of their heads and made them rustle down. Li Changlong's eyes flashed. He then said in a heavy voice, "King of Helchu, it's you, right? What? You dare to do it, but you don't dare to admit it?" His voice had already spread out, but the black pine forest remained silent. No one answered him. Kai Xiaocheng's lightning-like eyes swept back and forth. Suddenly a golden light flashed. Kai Xiaocheng bellowed, "Be careful!" He flew up and grabbed the golden light before it could pierce the back of a king-level expert. It was a small and exquisite dagger. It was only half the length of a palm. It didn't have any craftsmanship to speak of. The only praiseworthy thing about it was its sharpness. Everyone's gaze subconsciously followed Kai Xiaocheng's silhouette the moment he leapt out. But at this moment, 3 black lights suddenly shot out from another direction without a sound. The 3 black daggers were inserted into the backs of the 3 king-level experts. Li Changlong bellowed and rushed out in large strides. He rushed into the place where the 3 black lights had shot from like lightning. But there was no one there. In fact, there wasn't even the slightest sound. They hadn't even touched the enemy's shadow in a short period of time. But they had already lost 3 experts in silence. It was as if he had to fight a ghost in a foggy land. Ao Lang Yin tightly clenched his hands together. His palms were dripping with cold sweat. He felt a chill run down his spine. When had he ever experienced such an eerie and terrifying battle in his life? Suddenly a voice drifted over. It came from the left, and then from the right. It said in a cold and gloomy voice, "He not bad. It seems that you have some knowledge." "Yes, I am King of Hell Chu." This voice seemed to carry the dampness of hell, making people feel extremely uncomfortable when they heard it. Kai Xiaocheng and Li Changlong condensed their entire cultivation. But they couldn't tell where this voice was coming from. He only felt that this voice was faintly discernible. A moment ago it was still in the south, but the next moment, it was in the north. However, the distance between the south and the north was nearly 1,000 feet. A formidable opponent. Kai Xiaocheng and Li Changlong thought about this at the same time. Li Changlong also overturned his previous conclusion. The opposite party is definitely not a king-level expert. He must be at least an emperor-level expert. "You are not King of Hell Chu." Kai Xiaocheng calmed himself down and shouted in a cold voice. "King of Hell Chu is cunning and ruthless, but he definitely doesn't have the cultivation level of your excellency. Who are you? Why do you want to oppose my Ao clan?" There was one more thing that he hadn't said. King of Hell Chu isn't as gloomy as a ghost like you. In the Black Pine Forest, there was silence again. It was deathly silent. A gloomy aura had been emitted, but it was quickly withdrawn. Kai Xiaocheng's gaze turned cold. He silently floated out. He didn't make any sound, but he was as fast as lightning. He arrived on the opposite side in a flash. Then he shook his hand, and a few big trees were shattered by his palm with a loud bang. A piece of black cloth fluttered in the air. Kai Xiaocheng floated over like a ghost, and grabbed that piece of black cloth in his hand. Then he looked at it with rapt attention. However, he couldn't see anything. So he suspiciously grabbed that piece of cloth and returned. That gloomy aura that had been emitted a moment ago was lingering in his mind. He felt that it was very familiar, but he couldn't remember it. "What did you find?" Li Changlong flew over. "You take a look." Kai Xiaocheng handed over that piece of black cloth. "A piece of black cloth?" Li Changlong asked in a puzzled manner. He then brought that piece of cloth to his nose and sniffed it. "Be careful, it's poisonous." Kai Xiaocheng hastily reminded him. "It's nothing. It doesn't smell anything." Li Changlong smiled. He then turned over the piece of cloth and said, "It's an ordinary piece of black cloth. It seems that it was shattered by a palm. But I didn't see anyone's shadow even after I shattered the cloth. This matter is extremely strange." Kai Xiaocheng frowned. "Moreover, I seem to have felt a strange aura a moment ago. It's very," he spoke till here. Then he suddenly bellowed, "Dodge!" He flew forward. His speed was so fast that he left a trail of green smoke behind him. A golden light had already reached Ao Lang Yin's back. Kai Xiaocheng bellowed, and grabbed that golden light with all his might. The tip of his sword was less than an inch away from Ao Lang Yin's back. Li Changlong bellowed, and pounced in the direction where the golden light had come from. 40-50 people moved at the same time, and besieged that place. Suddenly, a few more black lights silently appeared from another direction. The blade light was almost the same color as the air. Then, the 5 people's backs were hit while they were charging forward. Several blood-curdling screams were heard. Then the 5 people fell to the ground and rolled back and forth. The enemy had launched too many hidden weapons this time, so they weren't fatal. However, one of them had been stabbed in the back of his heart and had lost his life. Bean-sized beads of sweat were unceasingly dripping down from Ao Lang Yin's forehead. He had almost stepped into the yellow springs a moment ago. He had been so close. His complexion had turned deathly pale. He was trying his best to remain calm. However, a panic-stricken look had already appeared in his eyes. The enemy's movements were as fast as a ghost's. 2 8th-grade Emperor-level experts couldn't even catch the enemy's shadow. This dark forest seemed to have turned into a place of death. They could only look on helplessly as people died one after another. "Rush out of the forest!" Kai Xiaocheng bellowed. The blue veins on his face were visible. He had already realized that the enemy was a top-notch assassin. Confronting the enemy in a place like this forest was equivalent to fighting the Dragon King in the water. This place was the enemy's absolute home ground. The enemy would have nowhere to hide only if they rushed out into an open area under the sun. Li Changlong suddenly came to his senses. He repeatedly whistled and led everyone to crowd around Ao Lang Yin to escape. Everyone had been full of confidence at the beginning of the ambush. They had thought that they would be able to capture King of Helchu as soon as he arrived. Who would have thought that they would run out of the forest in such a distressed manner? This was undoubtedly a huge irony. Another golden light flashed. Li Changlong put his hands together and caught the golden light in his hands. His nose became crooked as soon as he saw it. This is a piece of crushed gold. He casually threw it on the ground. Then he saw 3 golden lights shooting from another direction out of the corner of his eyes. Li Changlong leaped and caught them one by one. He was so sullen in his heart that he almost cursed. All of them are gold. Suddenly, a dense black light flashed from another direction. Li Changlong's heart skipped a beat. He knew that the enemy had finally launched a killing move. He roared and shook his hands. Then, he pounced in the direction of the person on the left. He had already figured out the pattern of this person's attack. He would leave immediately if his attack failed. In fact, this person would have left his hiding position at the same time he had launched his attack. This person has launched 3 attacks in a row, so he's most likely to appear in this direction. It doesn't matter even if he isn't. The route that I'm pouncing on is one of the 3 directions that the enemy has taken. So, I'm sure that I'll be able to intercept him if there's any movement. However, his body had barely flown 70 feet away when a series of sharp puff sounds resounded. Then more than 10 golden lights were shot from the place where the hidden weapons had been shot. The strength of these attacks was very fast. He hadn't changed his position this time. Damn it! Li Changlong's eyes were bloodshot. He wanted to change his direction, but it was already too late. The 13 golden lights seemed to have been calculated. They were very scattered, and each of them was aimed at a single person. Kai Xiaocheng, who was standing beside Ao Lang Yin, was caught off guard. He desperately turned around to intercept them, but he was only able to block 5 of them. Orderly screams resounded. 8 people were injured at the same time. Kai Xiaocheng's beard and beard were like halberds. He shouted, "Don't worry about anything. Let's rush out of the Black Pine Forest first." Even this 8th grade emperor-level expert felt fear in his heart at this moment. Who is the opposite party? How could they be so vicious? Such superb? Kai Xiaocheng didn't want to admit it in his heart, but he had to admit that the opposite party's assassination level was at the top of the world. He vigilantly looked in all directions. Then he drew back step by step and personally brought up the rear. Suddenly a burst of screams was heard. The team behind him was in a state of panic. Kai Xiaocheng angrily shouted, "What are you panicking about? Poison! The daggers and swords are poisoned." The poison flared up as soon as they were pulled out. A person screamed miserably. Kai Xiaocheng's heart shook. He hurriedly went over to take a look. He only felt a chill run down his spine. The 12 injured king-level experts had clenched their teeth and persevered. They hadn't even wrinkled their brows. But they had died as soon as the daggers had been pulled out. In fact, they hadn't even left behind a word. 22 people. The opposite party hadn't even shown up. And 22 experts had already died on his side. The king-level experts had died. None of the emperor-level experts had been injured. However, this was still a huge loss after all. Kai Xiaocheng had never seen such a cunning and cruel enemy in his more than 30 years of adventuring in the Jianghu. Everyone was about to rush out of the jungle when they saw that the sunlight in front of them was distorted. It seemed that the enemy's mood was fluctuating intensely in the dark. He wasn't willing to let them escape. Suddenly, a burst of gloomy aura spread out. Then it seemed to be forcibly restrained. Kai Xiaocheng's heart was moved again. It's so familiar. It's so familiar. This name should have been on the tip of my tongue. But why can't I remember it? Suddenly, a burst of golden light flashed. Dozens of golden lights pounced out at the same time this time. Kai Xiaocheng shouted loudly and leaped to intercept them. Meanwhile, a black light spread out from another direction like an inescapable net. Li Changlong issued a long and loud shout. His body moved like a dragon and fluttered in the air. Then, Kai Xiaocheng angrily rushed into the place where the black light had shot out from. He was 100% sure that the opposite party hadn't left this time. That's because I've locked onto him with my aura a moment ago. He shouldn't have chased him so close. Kai Xiaoqing's heart was filled with joy. He flew and pounced forward. A black shadow flew out from the shadows like a swallow and flew outwards. You still want to run? Stay here. Kai Xiaoqing roared loudly. He mobilized his lifelong martial power and shot his palms with all his might. That man didn't have enough time to evade. So, he was forced to helplessly sneer. Then, his long sword flashed a swordlight and flew out of his hand. That gloomy aura pervaded the air once again. However, the range of this attack was much larger this time. A divine light flashed in Kai Xiaoqing's mind. He finally realized why this gloomy aura was so familiar. He smashed the flying sword into pieces with a bang. Then he roared in a violent rage. Black Devil! So it's you! You even pretended to be king of Hell Chu. You're too shameless. Chapter 609. Kai Xiaoqing finally remembered why he had learned it with such familiarity. Isn't this gloomy smell the unique aura of the Black Devil clan? He has killed so many of my people like a ghost. Perhaps only the core assassins of the Black Devil clan have such a method of assassination in the entire world. That man had been shaken by Chu Yang's palm. He was wearing a black robe and a black mask. Then he finally revealed himself. He made a turn in the air and jumped up a big tree like a meteor. Then he sinisterly smiled and said, I, King of Hell Chu, will never impersonate someone else. What Black Devil? Have you become senile? Li Changlong had already rushed over while he was speaking. He angrily shouted, Black Devil, you're extremely despicable and shameless. You've been killed, and you still want to quibble? Blood for blood. Leave your life for this old man. That big tree was smashed to pieces with a loud bang. A black silhouette flew up in a swaying manner. He flashed under the setting sun and said with a sinister smile, AO clan is nothing more than this. Ridiculous, ridiculous. Then, he suddenly soared high into the sky and rushed over before Kai Xiaoqing could catch up with him again. Then he soared high into the sky and rushed over for 17 feet. His toes landed on a branch of a big tree. He was about to borrow the strength of the branch to fly out. A silhouette flashed, and Li Changlong appeared in front of him like a ghost. Then he shot his palm. That black silhouette fell backwards and fell to the ground like a meteorite. His mask was shattered by the strong wind generated by the palm. It fluttered in the sky like a black butterfly. That man choked and coughed. He then said with difficulty, Good palm strength. Li Changlong had caught a glimpse of that man's appearance. He had hawk-like eyes, sharp nose and sword-like eyebrows. His entire face was emitting an intense sinister aura. He couldn't help but fly into a rage. Black Devil, it's really you. What else do you have to say? That man coldly snorted and landed on the ground. Li Changlong and Kai Xiaoqing flew over at the same time. Suddenly, a burst of pink smoke rose from the place where that man had landed with a bang. Kai Xiaoqing was far away, so he hastily stopped his footsteps. However, Li Changlong had already rushed into the pink smoke. Only 7 or 8 consecutive collision sounds were heard from the smoke. Then, a black silhouette distorted the space and flashed a few times. Then he spouted a mouthful of blood and disappeared. Li Changlong rushed out of the pink smoke with a flushed face. Kai Xiaoqing still wanted to chase after him. However, Li Changlong shouted loudly, Don't chase after him. Kai Xiaoqing turned his head in amazement and saw that Li Changlong's body was on the verge of collapse. He was startled and wanted to come over to support him. Don't come over. Don't touch me. Li Changlong roared. Ah! Kai Xiaoqing was stunned. Li Changlong smiled sadly. What a vicious black devil. What an obscene HMO. In the end, I still fell into his trap. Kai Xiaoqing was shocked. What's wrong? Then he realized that pink smoke. Li Changlong exposed an indescribable expression on his face. He felt an intense shame and indignation. He clenched his teeth and said, It's the lust poison of the lust dragon. That's why I stopped you. If both of us are poisoned, then we're done for. Ah! Kai Xiaoqing was dumbfounded, as if he had been petrified. He suddenly understood why Li Changlong had such an expression on his face. He couldn't help but look up to the sky and curse loudly. Filthy words came out of his mouth, but he still couldn't quell the resentment in his heart. Who would have thought that the Black Devil would carry such a sinister technique as the lust poison of the lust mosquito? There was no antidote for the poison of the lust mosquito. One could only rely on the intercourse between a man and a woman to get rid of this lust poison. However, one's entire body would turn into pus and die if they couldn't excrete it within 3 hours. Li Changlong was more than 10 years old this year. Moreover, he was an 8th grade emperor-level expert. So, how could he lay his hands on a woman even if he found one? This was related to his lifelong reputation and chastity. Moreover, how could there be a stunning beauty in such a desolate place? He would be considered lucky if he could find a village girl at best. And it was absolutely impossible for him to return to the Ao clan. Li Changlong's face turned green and white. He then said in a hoarse voice, "I can suppress it for 10 hours at most with my cultivation. After 10 hours, I'll be beyond saving. Brotherly, hurry up and find one, find one." Kai Shaoqing fiercely stamped his feet. How could he say such words? How can this old man lose face like this? Li Changlong's lips trembled. Then he exhausted all his strength and loudly cursed, "Black Devil. I'm dead." Li Changlong had an impulse to cry after he had cursed. Even if he had been poisoned by that kind of poison, it would still be better than this. This is simply tormenting people to death, in the most humiliating way. This enmity is really big. Brotherly, a real man shouldn't be so petty. Your life is more important. You don't have to worry about firewood as long as you're alive. Kai Shaoqing anxiously advised. Besides, no one else knows about this matter. The heaven and the earth know about it. I, Kai Shaoqing, swear to the heavens that I'll die a miserable death if I reveal even a little bit of this matter. I'll make my grandchildren slaves and maids. Brother Kai, you. Li Changlong stamped his feet and sighed. Why did you make such a heavy oath? There's no time to lose. Let's go and look for it immediately. Kai Shaoqing said, That Black Devil has been injured by you. He won't dare to come again. Let second young master and the others wait here for a while. I'll go with you. I'll go and look for it myself. Li Changlong refused. He obviously didn't want to die. But, how can I let someone look at this matter from the side? We've been brothers for decades. But I can't do that. It's embarrassing. You do what you need to do. I'll keep watch for you. Kai Shaoqing and Li Changlong blushed after they had finished speaking. Both of them were people of virtue and prestige in the Ao clan. But, they felt embarrassed when they were discussing such a topic. The Li clan's territory is 700 miles to the west from here. There's a town there. So there must be a brothel there. Kai Shaoqing lowered his head. We'll arrive there in 10 hours with our speed. Brothel? The muscles on Li Changlong's face trembled. You want me to go to a brothel? Kai Shaoqing's face turned red as he angrily said, You've locked your manhood for so many years. And you've got the lust poison of the lust dragon now. Do you think that a woman can satisfy you? His face turned red as he said, I'm afraid that you won't be able to. Kill her. Li Changlong's complexion stiffened. His complexion turned purple as he muttered. Then, I can only go. How can there be so many women apart from the brothel? Kai Shaoqing gasped for breath. Li Changlong smiled bitterly. I've never set foot in a brothel in my entire life. But I've reached my old age now. And I have to, alas. He heaved a long sigh. Kai Shaoqing anxiously urged him. Don't sigh. Let's go quickly. If we're late. The two hurriedly ran to Ao Langyun's side and said that they had something to do. So, they had to leave for the time being. They also asked them to wait in an open area. They didn't even wait for a reply. Then, the two 8th grade emperor-level experts soared up and left impatiently. Li Changlong gnashed his teeth in anger as he vowed. I swear that I won't be a man if I don't slaughter the Black Devil clan in this lifetime. Ao Langyun was puzzled as he looked in the direction in which the two emperor-level experts had left. He was at a loss. At such a critical moment, what could be more important than the plan here? What will you do if King of Hell Chu comes after you two leave? This isn't a big plan. He felt depressed in his heart. So he sat down sullenly. Then, an intense desire to recruit subordinates of his own rose in his heart. Chu Yang flew out like a meteor. He stuck close to the ground and shot out like a black smoke. He rushed out more than 50 kilometers in one breath. And the color of the sky had finally darkened. Chu Yang jumped into the jungle with a schwa sound. He then coughed out the blood he had been suppressing. He had racked his brains and exhausted all his skills. Moreover, he had managed to escape from the black pine forest with the help of the sword spirit. Moreover, he had taught the enemy a bloody lesson. Moreover, he had successfully framed the Black Devil clan. However, he had also paid a huge price. Moreover, he had suffered a lot when he had clashed with Li Changlong in the end. It was just a short collision, but he had already consumed 2 incomplete heavy pills. He had needed 1 more to escape here. This meant that Chu Yang had encountered 3 life and death crises in the short span of a blink of an eye. Perhaps, Chu Yang would have had no choice but to let the sword spirit take over his body, if Li Changlong hadn't diverted half of his martial power to prevent the pink smoke from invading his body. However, all of this was worth it. Presumably, Ao Lang Yun and the others' hatred towards He Shu would have grown like bamboo shoots after the rain. Naturally, it would have been better if that emperor-level expert had been turned into pus by the aphrodisiac poison. Chu Yang spat out blood as he hastily took out the incomplete versions of the heavy pills and swallowed them. Then, he maliciously thought in his heart, it would have been lively if Li Changlong didn't know what kind of poison this was. And he would have called everyone to take a sniff of it. Everyone would have stuck out their crotches and looked for a brothel. 70 or 80 people would have pitched tents at the same time. I believe that the scene would have been spectacular. The sword spirit saw that Chu Yang had finally recovered. So he asked, "There's one thing that I don't understand. You can't speak in a faintly discernible voice with your current cultivation. How did you do it?" Chu Yang snorted and said with a smile, "Didn't you notice that I had patted a big tree in every direction since I had entered the forest? In fact, I had patted 1 tree in every 100 trees. I noticed that. But what does that have to do with this?" The sword spirit was puzzled. "I used Yin energy when I patted the trees. So the insides of the trees had already been shattered by me, and they had become empty shells. Then, I deliberately aimed my energy at those trees when I spoke. So an echo was naturally transmitted from those trees. Therefore, my voice could be heard from all directions." Chu Yang smiled and said, "One has to be careful in Jianghu. Especially, one must be cautious in a life and death situation. Sword spirit, you must learn this from me." The sword spirit didn't speak. This guy has been using my spiritual power to help him, and he had to rely on my heavy pills to save his life. But he has turned around to teach me a lesson. Chapter 610. Only the Ao clan has obstructed us on this road. This is obviously not right. Chu Yang muttered, "I slaughtered the Ao clan. But Odu Xiao and his father are still so calm? They haven't come to take revenge on me?" Sword Spirit sinisterly replied, "It's not that they won't take revenge. It's just that the time hasn't come yet." Fuck. Minister Chu cursed. He then stood up. "Open the way," he thought. Du Xing and the others have already been ambushed by the Ao clan. Is Luo Kudi injured? I wonder how injured he is. Ao clan's actions were beyond everyone's expectations. And they had already exceeded everyone's expectations. Mo Tianji and I have clearly miscalculated. How should we react? The entire Jianghu seems to have ushered in the end because of Ao clan's unreasonable interference. Everyone is trying their best to stir up trouble. Everyone is sparing no effort to sit on the sidelines and watch the fire burn. Everyone is waiting to take advantage of it. Ambition will inevitably rise in the Jianghu. Chu Yang looked up to the sky and sighed. "I'm afraid that less than half of the original clans will survive after this storm. In fact, even less. Countless king-level experts and revered martial artists will lose their lives in this storm." Chu Yang had never wanted to see Mo Tianji so urgently. The current situation had become so complicated that it could make one's hair stand on end. As far as Chu Yang knew, there were only 2 people in the entire heavenly layer who could deal with such a complicated situation with such ease. One is Diwu Qingro, and the other is Mo Tianji. Even I can't do it. In another direction, nighttime, Kai Xiaocheng and Li Changlong finally came out of the brothel. They looked up. and saw that the sky was filled with stars. It was almost dawn. 7 or 8 prostitutes were lying down in a room on the roof of the brothel behind them. They didn't even have the strength to lift a finger. Their cheeks were flushed, and their eyes were blurred. So satisfying. So satisfying. I didn't expect that such an old man would be so fierce. He lasted for 3 hours. He is so energetic. So fierce. Which young man can have such endurance? Motherfucker. I'll have to pick an old man when I receive a guest in the future. Even if it's free. Moreover, this guest is so generous. Look at the gold ingots on the ground. Oh, so happy. Emperor-level expert Li Changlong's legs had become somewhat soft. When they came out of the brothel, they didn't care about shocking the world. They lowered their heads and rushed all the way. In just a few moments, they were already dozens of miles away. It was too embarrassing. Brotherly, brotherly. Kai Shaoqun caught up from behind and blinked. Are you done? Li Changlong's complexion turned black. Enough. A cough cough. Brotherly is really old but vigorous. This. Kai Shaoqun gave him a thumbs up. This old man has been hearing calls from upstairs all night. There are a lot of people downstairs, and they are all betting. Bet? Li Changlong's face turned red. He angrily said, what bet? Everyone was betting on how long you could last. In the end, everyone lost. Kai Shaoqun coughed dryly. Li Changlong's face turned as black as charcoal. His heart, however, seemed to be possessed by demons and gods. He couldn't help but reminisce about it. Brotherly this, how does it taste? Kai Shaoqun chuckled. This taste. Li Changlong narrowed his eyes as he reminisced about it. Then, he suddenly realized something, and became furious. What taste? He then flew away. It seemed as if he had broken some taboo since then. This emperor-level expert Li Changlong would mysteriously disappear for a period of time. Whenever he went to a place, Kai Shaoqun was greatly puzzled. So he followed him several times. And he found that Li Changlong would change his appearance every time he went to a place. Then he would rush into a brothel. He's addicted to the taste. The world has lost a righteous ruler and gained a perverted thief. This is King of Hell Chu Sin. Chu Yang rushed all the way. Finally, 2 days later, he saw smoke rising in the distance at noon. His heart skipped a beat. He stepped on the top of the mountain and looked around. There's no sign of human habitation here. How can there be smoke rising from the kitchen? He walked along the main road and saw a fully loaded caravan coming towards him. There were more than 20 people in the caravan. Their heads were full of sweat, and their faces were full of exhaustion. It was obvious that they had traveled a long and arduous journey. Chu Yang's heart skipped a beat, and he stopped. The old man at the front of the caravan ran over while wiping his sweat and gasping for breath when he saw Chu Yang coming towards them. Sir, cough cough. May I ask how far it is to the Song clan's fort? Song clan's fort? Chu Yang didn't know what Song clan's fort was. So he replied, I'm sorry. I'm just in a hurry. I don't know where Song clan's fort is. The old man's face was simple and honest. He nodded and bowed. It's all right. Thank you very much, my lord. My lord is very kind. You're a good person. Chu Yang nodded and casually asked, Are you delivering goods on such a hot day? Yes. The old man was obviously very talkative, but his complexion turned bitter as he said, It's not easy for this little old man to get a job. I have to deliver goods for a living. Oh, there's no other way. There are old and young people at home. Dozens of people are waiting to eat. Chu Yang nodded and said with pity, It's not easy. The old man suddenly wanted to cry. There's no other way. I'm forced by life. Then he politely said, My lord, you haven't eaten yet, right? My lord, you didn't even bring a water bottle on such a hot day. The journey is long and arduous. The sun is high in the sky. It's not easy. No pop-up read no advertisement, read no advertisement. Then he shouted, Little dog, quickly bring a water bottle over. Let this lord moisten his throat. Then he turned to Chu Yang. My lord, it's fate that brought us together. It's just a small gesture. Please don't take it to heart. Please don't blame me for taking matters into my own hands. Chu Yang smiled warmly and said, What are you talking about? You have good intentions. I can't thank you enough. How can I blame you? The old man chuckled and said, My lord, You're really a good person. I've been delivering goods in Jianghu for so many years. I've relied on being kind to others. There are still many good people in this world. Chu Yang nodded repeatedly and said, You're really a good person. Then, he took the water bottle from the little dog and nodded to express his thanks. The old man's turbid eyes looked at the water bottle in Chu Yang's hand. He politely said, My lord, you should drink a mouthful. Chu Yang smiled warmly and said, I'm not thirsty for the time being, but I'll remember your kindness. I'll drink it whenever I'm thirsty. The old man smiled happily and said with relief, That's good. My lord, take care of yourself. I'll take my leave now. Chu Yang smiled gratefully and said, Thank you, my lord. Have a safe journey. The old man shouted and the carriage set off again. They were still moving slowly. Chu Yang stood on the side of the road and smelled the fragrance in the carriage. It seemed that they were pulling carriages of spices. The old man kept turning his head and waving his hand. Chu Yang smiled and waved his hand. He turned around and left. After taking 2 steps, his whole body suddenly trembled. He opened his eyes wide and hissed, Who are you? The old man looked at him from afar. It seemed that he didn't hear what he said. Chu Yang groaned. His body shook violently a few times. His eyelids seemed to be about to close. He tried to open his eyes and roared like spring thunder. Who are you? He sat down. In an instant, the sky and earth turned upside down. The old man saw Chu Yang fall down. He suddenly trotted over and stopped 3 feet away. He carefully asked, My lord, what happened to you? Chu Yang shook his head. It seemed that he wanted to shake off the dizziness in his head. He weakly threw the water bottle aside and muttered, How? How could it be poisoned? I was very careful. How could it be poisoned? His eyes were lifeless. He muttered as if there was no one around. He seemed to be extremely regretful. That old man and more than 20 coachmen gathered around. They cautiously looked at Chu Yang and said with a strange smile, Poisoned? Haha, my lord, this old man forgot to tell you. Although you were very vigilant and didn't dare to drink my water, you didn't think that the water bottle was poisoned. As long as your hand touched the water bottle, it would be poisoned, Chu Yang said weakly. He then retorted with great difficulty, Nonsense. Say, there's obviously no poison on that water bag. I can completely feel this. Haha, there was medicine on the water bottle, but it wasn't poison. The old man's eyes emitted a ferocious light. But as long as you touched the water bottle and passed by my carriage, you smelled the fragrance. It was highly toxic. Moreover, there was no antidote. Your whole body would be paralyzed. King of Hell Chu, can you die in peace? I see. Chu Yang sighed sadly and closed his eyes. Then he opened them again and weakly asked, Who are you? Haha. I, Chu Yang, have moved unhindered all my life. I have single-handedly overturned the heavens. But I'm going to die here today. Tell me who you are. Let me die with some understanding. That old man mischievously sneered and said, King of Hell Chu, you obviously won't die so easily. You've massacred 8,000 people of my clan. Don't tell me that you want to die so easily. Haha, you're dreaming. So it's the clan. Chu Yang forced a smile and said, This is the cycle of justice. What goes around comes around. I killed your entire clan. And I'm going to die in your hands. Oh Qingwu, it's you, right? The old man burst into loud laughter. His laughter was mournful and shrill. He then shouted, Yes, it's this old man. He wiped his face as he said this. Then, he removed his disguise and revealed his true face. He was the clan lord of the clan Qingwu. The complexion of the youth, who had given Chu Yang the water bottle, also changed. He turned into the valiant and formidable young lord of the clan. The young poison spirit, Du Shao. His complexion had turned ashen at this moment. He looked at Chu Yang with extreme resentment. King of Hell Chu, you hadn't thought that you would end up like this when you had ruthlessly and mercilessly attacked our clan, right? Chu Yang choked and laughed. He then nodded repeatedly. Du Shao. Yes, I hadn't thought of this. But I, King of Hell Chu, didn't die in vain. I didn't lose anything. More than 10,000 lives of the clan were buried with me. So what did I lose? Ha ha ha. I made a profit. I made more than 8,000 times. Ha ha. Du Shao. They will be scared if they see me in the underworld after you kill me. Waha. Chapter 611. Chu Yang smiled mockingly. Third, all of you are acting as if you don't have any cultivation. So, you must have taken some kind of medicine to conceal your cultivation, so that others can't see through you. That's why they've let their guard down. But, an expert is an expert. You're still an expert no matter how much you try to conceal your cultivation. The net doesn't even splash dust because of your feet. Chu Yang laughed out loud. This is a muddy road. The weather is dry now. So the horses' hooves create a cloud of dust when they step on it. Even a gust of wind can fill the sky. But your people are stepping on it as if they're stepping on a stone. Isn't it strange? Don't tell me that king-level experts are in charge of delivering goods on the road these days? Fourth, we've met for the first time. We've never met before. But you gave me a water sack. Chu Yang smiled. I've never seen such a kind-hearted person in the lower three heavens. You're kind-hearted by nature. But, you should have made sure that this person you've suddenly met doesn't have any intention of robbing you, right? You're so enthusiastic, as if you've seen your own father. Do you think I'm stupid? There are so many loopholes. Wouldn't I be more stupid if I fell into your scheme? Chu Yang indifferently said. Do you know that I caught all the spies who had been hiding in Iron Cloud Nation for more than 10 years, by relying on these clues when I arrived in the lower three heavens? And you're using this method to deal with me now? Chu Yang burst into loud laughter. Oh Chung-woo, has your head been kicked by a donkey? Oh Chung-woo's eyes were filled with anger. He pointed his trembling finger at Chu Yang. Then, he suddenly spat out a mouthful of blood with a puff sound. Chu Yang's vitality had almost recovered, so his eyes gradually exposed a murderous intention. You two, it's almost time. I should send you on your way. Thousands of O-Clan members are still eagerly waiting for you to reunite in the netherworld. Don't make them wait too anxiously. That would be my sin. Hold on. Du Xiao shouted in a low voice. He firmly looked at Chu Yang. I want to know. You've seen through our disguise. But, you've still come into contact with that water sack. And as far as I know, this kind of mixed poison is a unique creation of our O-Clan. There's no antidote in this world and no one knows. Even a monarch-level expert can't resist it with his own cultivation. How did you do it? Chu Yang snorted. You don't need to know this. The tribulation sword appeared in his hand with a clang sound. He then coldly shouted, Du Xiao, it's your turn now. Suddenly, Chung-woo laughed miserably, and black smoke came out of his body. Chu Yang squinted his eyes, and slashed his sword horizontally. A ray of light flew out like a meteor, and chopped off Chung-woo's head. Then, Chu Yang used the tip of his sword to cut open Chung-woo's chest lapel, and took out a book. Black smoke was continuously coming out of this book. Wherever Chu Yang's vital qi went, the black smoke was immediately extinguished. I knew that you had this thing. It's no wonder that I couldn't find it even after searching the entire O-Clan. Chu Yang sneered. He saw 4 words written on the cover of the book. 10,000 Poisons Evil Book. The O-Clan had relied on this secret technique to become famous. In fact, it was as thick as a small brick. Du Xiao's eyes were bloodshot. He couldn't help but feel his blood boil when he saw that his father had died tragically in front of him. He roared and rushed forward. His figure was fleeting and unpredictable. His body was emitting a thick black fog with a fishy smell. This was the poison demon technique that the clan lord of the O-Clan could practice. Chu Yang's current cultivation was far higher than Du Xiao's, so he turned around and rushed into the black fog. Then, the tribulation sword angrily shot forward. Du Xiao screamed. The tip of the sword was pulled out of his chest, and blood spurted out. However, he still staggered and didn't fall down. He firmly clutched his chest, and asked with difficulty, Why aren't you afraid of poison? Chu Yang was inside the black smoke. He looked at Du Xiao with his clear eyes, and slowly said, I'm not afraid of poison because I'm the master of the tribulation sword. No poison in this world is of any use to me. Du Xiao's eyes bulged, and almost fell out of their sockets. He had been seriously injured, but he still felt his blood rushing through his body at a rapid speed. So that's how it is. Du Xiao looked at Chu Yang in a daze. Then he suddenly faced upwards and miserably laughed. He seemed to have gone crazy and shouted, I regret it. I regret it. He finally fell down with a plop sound, His body twitched, and then stopped making any sound. Head. Du Xiao was dead, but his eyes were still wide open. There was no sadness or resentment in his stiff pupils. There was only endless regret. His body gradually began to wrinkle, and lost its vitality. Chu Yang looked at Du Xiao's eyes. Du Xiao had died with his eyes wide open. He secretly sighed in his heart. He could understand Du Xiao's last words. I regret it. I regret it. What does that mean? The master of the tribulation sword. The appearance of the tribulation sword once every 10,000 years also symbolized that the upper three heavens was about to be turned upside down. The current ruling clans would fall from power one by one. The brothers of the master of the tribulation sword would form a new ruling clan in the future and rule the upper three heavens. This was a convention that hadn't changed in the upper three heavens for 10,000 years. Some people had wanted to fight against it. So, the original ruling clans and the master of the tribulation sword would fight to the death every time the upper three heavens changed. However, the master of the tribulation sword would win every time and change the situation of the upper three heavens. Du Xiao also had this opportunity. He could have treated people with sincerity like Xie Danxiong's clan. He could have made friends with Chu Yang and gained Chu Yang's favor. Then, how could the O clan not have a place in the upper three heavens in the future? The O clan couldn't become one of the ruling clans of the upper three heavens. But, it was certain that the O clan would become one of the ruling clans of the upper three heavens. That was the ultimate goal that countless generations of the O clan had dreamt of since its establishment. It was also the supreme glory of the upper three heavens. It was already at their fingertips. The god of fate had already bestowed this great gift to the O clan. But they had ruined this once in 10,000 years opportunity because of a moment of greed. Moreover, they had also brought their clan into the abyss of death. Nearly 10,000 people of their clan had perished. How could Du Xiao not regret? The O clan had clearly made up their mind to make friends with King of Hell Chu at that time. They had even held a meeting to return the money to King of Hell Chu. Then, they would make a fair trade with King of Hell Chu. Du Xiao had opposed it in his heart, even when he had changed his mind. And the clan's determination hadn't been strong at that time. So, the matter could have been reversed as long as Du Xiao had resolutely opposed it. However, he had become greedy, angry, and ambitious at that critical moment. And it had eventually gotten out of hand. How could Du Xiao not regret? Even if he was killed, if his spirit still existed after his death, he would be filled with endless regret until the end of time. Chu Yang sighed deeply as he looked at Du Xiao, who had shouted, I regret it so much. Before his death, he should have been one of the 12 influential figures of the upper three heavens in the future. He hadn't even started to grow, but he had died at Chu Yang's hands. Chu Yang couldn't help but sigh as he recalled Du Xiao's heroic demeanor in the upper three heavens. His poison techniques had made the entire upper three heavens tremble in fear. You regret it. But how can I not regret it? I would have had the assistance of a clan that was proficient in using poison in the future, if you had made friends with me wholeheartedly. Then, wouldn't my path of the sword calamity have been much easier? How many enemies would have been killed by the word poison in the battle of the upper heavens? How many casualties would have been prevented from my brothers? It's a pity that you've chosen another path. I had already felt that you, the poison spirit, would have been a formidable enemy in the lower three heavens back in the great Zhao continent city. I had already expressed my goodwill in the lower three heavens Mt Dingjun. I had revealed my intention to make friends with you. Otherwise, why would I have given you such leniency? Why would I have given you such preferential conditions? I, King of Hell Chu, have a lot of money. But I'm not a prodigal. You, Du Xiao, were vicious in the lower three heavens. But you were still a lover. You still had a pure heart in the lower three heavens Mt Dingjun. But why did you suddenly get blinded by your ambition at the critical moment? You ultimately chose another path. You regretted it. But you only regretted it when you were about to die. You should have known that regret is useless, right? Farewell, poison spirit. No. There will be no more poison spirit in the heavens from now on. Chu Yang gently sighed. He extended his hand and closed Du Xiao's eyes. Then he silently said, I'm sending you on your last journey. I'm making you close your eyes in this world. And I'm also making you open your eyes in the other world. It's said that people who die with grievances will become blind in the netherworld. I don't want you to become blind. I'm not doing this for Du Shao of this life. Instead, I'm doing this for the all-powerful poison spirit of my previous life. Du Shao of this life isn't worth it. But the poison spirit of my previous life is worth it. Who would have known that the 12 influential figures of the lower 3 heavens in my previous life were my Leduo? Especially Dark Bamboo Black Devil, Du Shao Poison Spirit Xiegong and Tian Buru, who stood at the peak. This is my dream. Chu Yang stood up and shouted in a low voice. Then the 2 shopkeepers came out. They struck a big hole in the ground with a bang. Then, they put the corpses of Du Zhao's father and the O clan's experts into the hole. Then they pushed their palms and piled up a grave. The calamity sword flew out with a schwa sound and cut down a big tree on the roadside. The sword light whooshed, and a section of the tree trunk turned into a smooth tombstone in an instant. It then stood in front of the grave. Chu Yang thought for a moment. Then he carved a few words on this simple and crude tombstone. He sighed deeply. Then he got up and flew away. He didn't turn his head, even after his figure had disappeared. The setting sun shone on the tombstone and illuminated the words on it. There was no name of the deceased. There was no introduction. There was only a poem. The entanglement of gratitude and grudges is Jianghu. Heroes and heroines are also nothingness. The emperor regrets my regret. Who wins and loses in the dreamy clouds? What's the point of this life or the previous life? Who's innocent since ancient times? Heroes dance in the yellow springs and blue skies. The heavenly imperial court is poisonous. This poem was either to commemorate the poison spirit of his previous life, or it was Chu Yang's own realization. However, Chu Yang's obsession from his previous life had suddenly vanished like smoke in thin air. It was just as Chu Yang had written this poem. Heroes and heroines are also nothingness. Who wins and loses in the dreamy clouds? What's the point of this life or the previous life? Who's innocent since ancient times? After all, his previous life didn't exist anymore. Chapter 612. Chu Yang's figure flew on the main road. His heart calmed down after a long time. After that, they didn't encounter any more robberies. Instead, they saw several Jianghu people killing each other. The closer they got to the gathering place of the great clans, the more frequent such scenes became. Corpses were strewn all along the way. The chaos of the Jianghu had arrived. He pondered over the O clan's 10,000 poisons evil scripture, and felt that he had gained some insights. It seemed that the 10,000 poisons evil scripture could be used. The first chapter of the 10,000 poisons evil scripture, Poison Evil Divine Skill. Chapter 2, All Poisons in the World. Chapter 3, Creating Poisons. Chapter 4, All Poisonous Insects in the World. Chapter 5, All Poisons in the World. Chapter 6, All Poisons in the World. In the fourth chapter, The World of Poisonous Insects, the names and images of the Poison Recovery Flood Dragon and the Lust Flood Dragon were listed, and there was also a detailed introduction. The lust poison of the Lust Dragon was one of the poisons that couldn't be cured. Sword Spirit wrinkled his brows in Chu Yang's mind. He sensed some abnormal fluctuations in Chu Yang's energy, so he couldn't help but ask, "What are you doing?" "A book," Chu Yang said as he flipped through the book. "What book?" 10,000 Poisons Evil Scripture. 10,000 Poisons Evil Book? The Sword Spirit was startled. He then said, "Let me have a look." With a thought, the evil book of 10,000 poisons, which was full of strange techniques, entered the tribulation space. Inside the space, the Sword Spirit had a serious expression on his face as he flipped through the pages. Finally, he closed the book and heaved a deep sigh. Then, he closed his eyes as if he was thinking about something. A long while passed before the Sword Spirit finally opened his mouth and said, "So, it's this thing. This isn't called the 10,000 Poisons Evil Book. The correct name should be Compendium of World Poisons. Guide to Poisons in the World?" Chu Yang asked in puzzlement. "Not bad." Sword Spirit took a deep breath. The Guide to the World of Poisons doesn't only have the effect of poisoning people. This is the famous method of the poison doctor Wu Jucheng. Poison Dr. Wu Juqing? Chu Yang racked his brains, but he had never heard of this name. Poison Dr. Wu Juqing was one of the brothers of the Master of Calamity, soared 40,000 years ago. The Wu clan was also one of the big clans that controlled Zhejiang Tian 30,000 years ago. Back then, Poison Dr. Wu Juqing had relied on his poison skills to roam the pugilistic world. He had never used his hands or weapons to kill and save people. With a smile, he caused the destruction of tens of thousands of people, beheaded the heroes, and left them helpless. His might shook the world. Back then, the most soul-stirring battle was when we fought the Heavenly Wolf sect of the Upper Three Heavens. The Heavenly Wolf sect resisted stubbornly by relying on the dense forests and mountains. After Wu Juqing arrived, he stood in the limelight and released a plague. The area within a radius of 3,000 miles became a dead zone. Be it man or beast, none survived. Other than being a master of poison, Wu Juqing is also a divine physician. No matter what kind of injury it was, no matter what kind of poison it was, he could use poison to fight poison with poison and cure it without any repercussions. He is sometimes righteous and sometimes evil, doing things according to his heart's desire. He is truly a strange talent of his generation. However, after Wu Juqing disappeared for 10,000 years, a new calamity sword master was born. The Wu clan declined and slowly disappeared from the Upper Three Heavens. The guide to the world of poisons also never appeared in the Jianghu again. However, someone from the Wu clan escaped that year. I suspect that supreme martial artist Chen Feng, who once shook the world, is a descendant of Wu Juqing. The sword spirit narrated the life stories of this legendary figure in detail. It seemed as if he was very familiar with them, and Chu Yang was fascinated as he listened. So that's how it is, Chu Yang silently sighed. However, the book in your hand is incomplete. It lacks the most important fight poison with poison. Moreover, that poison technique has clearly been modified. The sword spirit smiled strangely. Oh. Chu Yang immediately heard the strangeness in the sword spirit's tone. He asked, how is it? Haha. Because this book was rewritten by me. The expression on the sword spirit's face couldn't be described. I didn't expect to see this book again, after 30,000 years. You rewrote it. Chu Yang was genuinely shocked this time. Yes, I obtained the guide to the world of poisons after the destruction of the Wu clan. The sword master of that time said, this book will be immortalized in the hands of a ruler for hundreds of generations. But, in the hands of a person with evil intentions, it will torment the common people. I wanted to destroy it, but I couldn't bear to do so. So I modified it and put it away. I deleted all the evil and cruel methods that violated human nature. I also reduced the power of the poison technique to the minimum. Then, I separated the book into 2 volumes. The book you're holding now is the first volume, the sword spirit said. So, do you still remember it? Chu Yang's eyes lit up. I remember it. However, this kind of martial art is too dangerous. It's not easy to control it if other people practice it. Moreover, who will control the danger of this poison technique if you're no longer in this world? The sword spirit looked at Chu Yang meaningfully. There's no such thing as good or evil in this world. The so-called righteous sects don't lack sinister villains and ambitious fanatics. The so-called evil and crooked paths don't necessarily consist of devils who torment the common people. There are also great men and true heroes who emerge in an endless stream. Chu Yang insipidly said. Moreover, you destroyed it at that time because you had already mastered the heavenly tribulation. But I haven't started yet. The sword spirit's eyes became serious. You want to practice it? I have the heavenly tribulation divine technique. So why would I practice this poison technique? Chu Yang said. But I must know some of the methods to save people or to harm people. This will be beneficial to my future plans. The sword spirit pondered for a long while. Then he said, it's okay to let you know as long as you don't spread it out. Well, I'll give you the complete guide to world poisons. Chu Yang was overjoyed. He said, you have a lot of good things in your head. How about this? I'll give you a lot of paper and a pen. You can record everything in your head for me, okay? It's so troublesome to squeeze out at the last moment. The sword spirit became angry. He said, I saw this thing and recalled my past memories. So I remembered it. Do you think that I can take out anything? You don't have a medium. So you can't recall my memories. What's the use of that? Moreover, can you learn my 10,000 years worth of memories, even if I write them down? That's something that tens of thousands of people have to study for their entire lives to achieve. You're the greediest. Chu Yang touched his nose and forced a smile. This guy must have a lot of good things in his head. There will be many things suitable for my brothers to enhance their strength, if I can dig them out. But where am I going to find so many mediums? Chu Yang thought as he looked at the sword spirit, who was trying hard to recall. But his feet didn't stop moving. He climbed the mountaintop. He saw a green grassland in front of him. The trees were lush, houses were continuous, and a stream of green water meandered around the periphery of the populated area. It was as if this picturesque village was surrounded by a sparkling and beautiful belt. I've arrived at the Mo clan. When Gu Duxing passed through this forest, he vaguely felt that something was wrong. The aura that was coming from the front was faintly oppressive. But he couldn't take a detour at this time. The Gu clan was about 200 miles away. This was the only way. If he took a detour, he would have to take a detour of several thousand miles. The enemy had chosen this time and terrain to attack. Gu Duxing steeled his heart and walked out in large strides. I can't take a detour, so I'll kill my way through. He came out of the jungle and saw a man standing upright and unafraid at the intersection between the two mountains. The tassel of his long sword was fluttering in the wind on his shoulder. At the entrance of the gap between the two mountains, this person's figure was like a sharp sword. It was as if this sharp sword had split the two mountains apart. This man was tall and sturdy. His figure was tall and sturdy. His face was covered with curly hair. He looked like a black iron tower. He stood tall like a mountain on the road. There was a wide road on both sides of his body. But it didn't know why this man gave people the feeling that he was blocking the entire road. Not even a drop of water could trickle through. Brother Gu, it's been a long time. This man grinned and said indifferently when he saw Gu Duxing come out. He opened his shoulders, and a domineering aura suddenly gushed out. Tu Qianhao, Brother Tu. Gu Duxing's body landed lightly. He stopped, and said with a cold expression, the scorching sun is high in the sky. Brother Tu must be in a good mood to bask in the sun. Do you have nothing better to do? Tu Qianhao smiled and shook his head. Brother Gu, we haven't seen each other for a long time. Your attitude is very bad. Gu Duxing sneered and said without any trace of politeness, Tu Qianhao, you're blocking my way. Don't tell me that you have good intentions. Tell me, what do you want to do today? Tu Qianhao took a deep breath. He slowly removed the sheathed sword from his back, and said in a heavy tone, this too suffered a crushing defeat at the hands of Brother Gu in the last battle. So, I have come here today to ask Brother Gu for advice. Gu Duxing took a step forward. His whole body was surrounded by a cold sword energy. His eyes slowly swept across the surroundings. He then shouted in a low voice, You're alone? The contempt in his tone wasn't concealed in the slightest. Tu Qianhao snorted. He glared at him and said, I won't hide it from you. 20 people of our two clan have come this time. 21 people including me. Our purpose is to kill you. Hee, you have the means. Gu Duxing put on a fake smile and snorted. Then, why haven't you called them out to fight? Why have you left the great young master here to wrangle with me? Tu Qianhao's face turned red. He then said boldly, But, I want to fight with you first before besieging you. A battle of life and death. It seemed as if his eyes were about to spurt out a raging fire. He then said in a heavy tone, I want to have a fair fight with you today. First I'll kill you. Second you'll kill me. I'll cut my own throat on the spot, if anyone dares to fight before the battle of life and death is decided. Then he turned around and shouted in a stern voice, Did you hear that? Get out here for me. 20 people came out from behind the mountain rock with several schwa sounds. They then stood behind Tu Qianhao. Tu Qianhao's complexion was like iron. He then shouted in a stern voice, Whoever dares to fight before the outcome is decided will kill me with their own hands. Do you understand? This young master has been rampant, proud, despicable, and scheming in this lifetime. But No one has ever said that I have no backbone. And no one is allowed to say that my Tu clan has no backbone. Do you understand? Translator. Mr. Voltaire Xiaogu had taken over Yu Lao's authority. He had become the one and only Yu Lao in the world. All the marriages in the world were in his hands. What? Brother, you're a rich second generation? A great master? You don't lack women? Very good. Then, you can try from today onwards. Do you still have women? This Yu Lao can guarantee that you won't even see a chrysanthemum flower. Big Mouth Parrot. The Postmodern Life of Yu Lao, book number 2271796. Chapter 613. Yes. Young master will win. 20 people of the Tu clan shouted at the same time. The two old men in embroidered robes in the front exposed a deeply worried look on their faces. Gu Du Xing, are you relieved now? Tu Qianhao turned around and looked at Gu Du Xing with a burning gaze. He then shouted in a stern voice. The contempt on Gu Du Xing's face slowly vanished and was replaced by respect. It was the respect of a true martial artist. He became serious and said, Tu Qianhao, why are you doing this? Tu Qianhao smiled bleakly and indifferently said, my marrow was cleansed when I was born. I started to practice martial arts when I was 2 years old. And I started to practice sword when I was 3 years old. I was hailed as the #1 martial genius of the Tu clan in several hundred years when I was 7 years old. And I also think that I'm very amazing. I'm very confident and very conceited. I was very arrogant before you and I had a fight. I thought that other people were inferior to me, but you were ranked above me. So I refused to accept it. But I found out that I was wrong after I fought with you. He said in a low and deep voice, you shattered my dream and made me realize who I am. But you became my inner demon after that. I crazily practiced sword in order to defeat you. I wanted to defeat you in a fair and square one-on-one situation. I wouldn't have been able to reach the peak of martial arts, even if I had lived on, if I hadn't been able to do so. But that's my lifelong pursuit. I might as well die if I were to declare that this road is hopeless. At least, I wouldn't have disgraced Tu Qianhao by dying under your sword. Tu Qianhao burst into loud laughter. He then shouted, Gu Du Xing, do you understand my thoughts? Do you understand? Are you willing to fight with me? Gu Du Xing's complexion became bleak like the autumn wind. He then said in a clear voice, I understand, and I can completely understand. Tu Qianhao, I will fulfill your wish and fight with you. Tu Qianhao laughed like thunder. He unsheathed his sword and slashed it against the wind. It issued a buzzing sound, and thousands of sword afterimages appeared in front of him. He then said in a loud voice, Today is a battle of life and death. Gu Du Xing, kill me if you have the ability. I don't need your respect. I only need your life. Don't worry, I won't show any mercy. Gu Du Xing let out a long cry. The black dragon sword seemed to have a life of its own. With a clear cry, it automatically left the scabbard. With a flash of light in the air, it fell into Gu Du Xing's hand. Even if I kill you, I will let you die in a fighting posture. Gu Du Xing said in a deep voice. He raised his head and opened his eyes. Then, 2 beams of light shot out from his eyes. The black dragon sword's roar reverberated in the air for a long time. The sword in Tu Qianhao's hand fiercely buzzed. Tu Qianhao burst into loud laughter. Sword Emperor. Sword Emperor. I have indeed met the Sword Emperor in this life. With a loud roar, the muscles all over his body tightened. His entire body seemed to have swelled up and become even more powerful. Tu Qianhao's face had turned red, and his eyes had shot out a feeling of extreme excitement. In fact, every pore of his entire body had been stimulated by this kind of happiness and had expanded. The boundless fighting intent had thoroughly integrated into Tu Qianhao's blood and soul. The lifeless sword in Tu Qianhao's hand had already expressed its allegiance when the Sword Emperor had appeared. However, Tu Qianhao could only feel his fighting intent boiling uncontrollably. Gu Du Xing, come and fight. Gu Du Xing let out a long roar, and his sword light crisscrossed. Tu Qianhao laughed heartily and flew up. Suddenly, thousands of sword lights whizzed out from all directions and transformed into life-snatching sword energy. They then attacked Gu Du Xing. The whistling sound of the sword wind suppressed the mournful northern wind of the mountain pass. Gu Duxing was dressed in black clothes. Tu Qianhao's sword light was flickering in and out of existence. The black dragon sword swept, flickered, stuck, and cut. A cold light burst out. He didn't yield to Tu Qianhao in the slightest. One of them was dressed in black clothes, and the other in black clothes. Two groups of sword lights were rolling over and over again. Later, only a group of resplendent light balls could be seen. But the figures of these two people couldn't be seen. Suddenly, the sound of sword lights colliding with each other resounded unceasingly. It sounded like the wind blowing on a lotus, and the rain hitting on a banana leaf. Then, only the whistling of sword energy could be heard. The sword lights were dazzling, but there was no collision. Awesome! Tu Qianhao burst into loud laughter. It seemed as if he had gone insane. Tu Qianhao had outperformed himself under the pressure of Gu Duxing's sword emperor. Tu Qianhao's slaughter spirit sword technique had been displayed to the extreme. Suddenly, it was like a violent storm. Suddenly, it was like a gentle breeze and drizzle. He only felt that the blood in his entire body was rushing at a rapid speed. His entire body was getting more and more excited. It was a kind of excitement that had almost reached an ethereal state. He had forgotten everything at this moment. He had forgotten that he was fighting. He had forgotten that he was Tu Qianhao. He had forgotten his own sword. He had forgotten everything in this world. He only asked for a fight to his heart's content. He didn't care about life or death. He felt very happy. It was the kind of unrestrained happiness of soaring through the clouds and dancing in the streets. Therefore his wild laughter soared to the sky. His roar soared to the sky. His tall and sturdy body leaped and flew like a madman. He was like an eagle soaring in the sky. He was like a dragon swimming in the sea. He was like a tiger roaring in the forest. Ha 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 ha. Tu Qianhao laughed crazily. He then roared to his heart's content. I can die in peace if I have to fight like this in this life. Gu Duxing was as calm as ice and snow under Tu Qianhao's crazy attacks. His eyes flickered with pity, hesitation and indecisiveness. Kill? Or not to kill? The previous Tu Qianhao may have made people dislike him. But the current Tu Qianhao is worthy of anyone's respect. I would have killed myself on the spot in shame if I had shown mercy to him. I wouldn't have died in peace if I had been him. The only way to treat a respected opponent with respect is to display my full strength and fight with him. Any hesitation or mercy would have been a supreme humiliation to my opponent. Gu Duxing's eyes flashed. He then shouted, Brother Tu, be careful. The black dragon sword issued a long cry. It then jumped up. Little by little, streaks of cold light rolled out from the sword's body. The sword light was cold as it jumped and flickered. It was like a willow, the wisp of the netherworld. It was unceasingly flickering. However, it was flickering with a cold, murderous intention. Come on! Tu Qianhao roared. He crazily attacked. The sword light flickered, and drops of blood sparkled like fairies. They jumped in the bright and resplendent sword light, and then disappeared. Tu Qianhao laughed loudly. Gu Duxing sighed. The black dragon sword was already as firm as a rock. Tu Qianhao's laughter came to an abrupt end. His movements also came to an abrupt end. He calmly stood in the same place. The long sword was still in his right hand. The sword light was still flickering and rippling. He slowly lowered his head. He saw that half of the long sword was flickering with a gloomy and cold light on his chest. The tip of the sword had already pierced deeply into his heart. Tu Qianhao's face had a very strange expression as he looked at the long sword that had pierced deeply into his chest. It seemed as if he was reminiscing about this peculiar feeling. His face had a thoughtful look on it. Gu Duxing held the hilt of the sword firmly like a rock. His gaze deeply looked at Tu Qianhao's face. He then softly said, I used my full strength and couldn't hold back. Tu Qianhao's face exposed a trace of a smile of understanding. He then heroically said, I wouldn't have died in peace if you hadn't used your full strength. Then he lowered his eyes and looked at the long sword in his chest. He was somewhat reluctant to part with it. He then said in a somewhat frustrated manner, Don't pull it out yet. All right. Gu Duxing's eyes darkened. The people of the Tu clan angrily shouted, and suddenly rushed forward. Stop. Tu Qianhao stood upright. He then angrily growled. The matter between the two of us isn't over yet. Who dares to come forward? His heart had already been pierced, so he was dead for sure. However, his growl was still awe-inspiring. His domineering and arrogant aura was completely exposed. The 20 experts of the two clans stopped at the same time. They anxiously looked at their young lord. Their faces were full of anxiety, but they also carried deep grief and powerlessness. Retreat. Tu Qianhao's voice was low and deep, but it was firm and unquestionable. He then repeated, "Retreat." The 20 experts slowly retreated while holding their swords. Several of them had tears flickering in their eyes. Tu Qianhao didn't seem to feel anything. He closed his eyes, and then opened them again. He then looked at the white clouds floating in the distant sky. His eyes didn't seem to have the slightest bit of expression, but they also seemed to be filled with a myriad of emotions. Do you know Gu Duxing? I, Tu Qianhao, could have become a swordsman. I could have moved unhindered in the heavens. I had this feeling that I could have done it. But I've ruined my own future with my own hands now. I've ruined my own life. Tu Qianhao laughed in a hoarse voice. I'll always be below you even if I become a swordsman and an emperor-level expert. I'll never surpass you. And we are people of the same era. Your achievements are far inferior to mine. Therefore, it's a shame for me to have my achievements suppressed by you guys. I, Tu Qianhao, don't want it. Tu Qianhao wouldn't be Tu Qianhao if I wanted it. Tu Qianhao looked at Gu Duxing with his sharp eyes. He then proudly said, I'm Tu Qianhao if I die like this. Gu Duxing remained silent for a long time. Then he gently nodded. He said, You're indeed qualified to be so proud. Tu Qianhao smiled. His face was covered with a beard, but his smile gave Gu Duxing a very pure and innocent feeling at this moment. In fact, it seemed as if he was a child who was showing off his little achievements. Naive and unaffected. I didn't want to die, Tu Qianhao slowly said. But I joined the alliance organized by Du Shao because of my hatred and obsession with you. And I only wanted to kill you at first after I had entered. But I suddenly became disheartened later on. Too selfish. Too unforthright. Each of those people was a talent. But each of them was fighting and scheming against each other. That kind of environment. Tu Qianhao deeply sighed. Then he clenched his teeth and cursed from the bottom of his heart. Fucking hell. It suffocated me to death. He had used a lot of strength in this curse. In fact, it seemed as if he had used the strength of his heartbeat. Anyone who had heard it would have had the feeling that these words had come from the bottom of his heart. I have a headache. I'm going to get some medicine. Chapter 614. Especially when I learned that you had already become a sword emperor. Tu Qianhao laughed in a desolate manner. Heh. At that moment, I suddenly felt disheartened. I said that I would kill Gu Duxing at that time. The Black Devil said that he was already a sword emperor. So what grade of king level were you? He had imitated the tone of the young Black Devil when he had said these words. His gloominess and ridicule had been imitated to perfection. This was enough to show how much these words had stimulated him at that time. I thought at that time, I can't catch up with you. I can't kill you. But I will be killed by you. I will die in your hands. So it should be okay, right? Tu Qianhao snorted. Tu Qianhao will die. But I'm 1,000 times better than those bastards who only speak ill of people behind their backs. They don't dare to face their enemies head-on. I'm 10,000 times prouder than them. Tu Qianhao roared. This sentence was clearly too loud. His mood fluctuated violently. The sword wound on his chest had caused him to spurt out blood. Gu Duxing's expression shook. He used his finger as a knife and poked twice on Tu Qianhao's chest to stop the bleeding. Tu Qianhao's complexion turned as pale as gold paper. He smiled warmly. Don't bother. I've come here today to seek death. Do you really think that a 7th grade king level expert like me can defeat a sword emperor? Gu Duxing was speechless. He sighed and said in disappointment and frustration, You didn't have to die. Tu Qianhao smiled freely. Then he suddenly said, But I have boundless confidence now. I may not necessarily lose if I have the opportunity to fight with you next time. That's because I suddenly comprehended my own way of the sword when I was at death's door. I comprehended my own sword emperor realm. Tu Qianhao's complexion was solemn and proud. He gasped for breath and said, "I'll be a sword emperor after today if I don't die." Gu Duxing knitted his brows. He was somewhat worried as he looked at Tu Qianhao's increasingly pale complexion. Tu Qianhao choked and coughed. He then said in a somewhat strange manner of self-mockery, "Do you know when I had this kind of comprehension?" "When?" Gu Duxing could not help but agree. "When the tip of your sword pierced my heart." A boundless feeling of death suddenly welled up. "But I comprehended my own way of the sword at that time." Tu Qianhao smiled brightly. "When the tip of your sword pierced my heart, I unexpectedly made a breakthrough at that time." Ha ha ha. It's so damn funny. What a fucking joke. This is really fucking funny. Gu Duxing couldn't help but be speechless. He didn't know what to say. The tip of the enemy's sword pierced his heart, and he broke through at that time. Such a fortuitous encounter would make anyone speechless. So it turns out that the greatest breakthroughs can only be achieved when one is on the brink of death. Tu Qianhao finished laughing. Then he sighed in disappointment and frustration. Then he muttered, "I remember that Senior once said that the aura of death is the precursor to a breakthrough. I've always been puzzled, but today, I finally understand." Heh. Suddenly, he turned his head and looked at Gu Duxing with a burning gaze. He said, "Gu Duxing, although I'm dead, I can't waste my sword Dao. Please do me a favor." "What favor?" Gu Duxing had already faintly guessed it. "Only you can understand my state of mind at that time. So I'll tell you my sword Dao." Tu Qianhao's pupils suddenly opened wide, and he exposed a fanatical look. "Gu Duxing, I hope that my sword Dao will be famous throughout the world. Its might will shake the heavens. I beg you to help me." Me. Gu Duxing had already guessed it. But he still felt his whole body shake when he heard Tu Qianhao say it himself. "I can call the experts of your clan over, and you can impart it to them." Gu Duxing said indifferently. "No." Tu Qianhao coldly snorted. "They don't deserve it. They can't understand it. Gu Duxing, don't waste my life." Tu Qianhao didn't wait for Gu Duxing to reply after he finished speaking. Instead he said, "My realization is called forget emotions. Forget everything. Forget yourself. Forget the engraving. Forget the sky. Forget the earth. Forget the emotions. Forget everything. This is the highest realm of my engraving technique." Tu Qianhao said with difficulty. "You listen carefully." Then, he started to speak without caring about anything else. Gu Duxing also gradually became immersed in his voice, as he narrated little by little. Gu Duxing's cultivation and temperament allowed him to feel the power of this realm almost as soon as he heard the first sentence. Therefore, he gathered all his spirit and tried hard to listen to every sentence and every word. Tu Qianhao was like a lamp that had run out of oil. Perhaps, he would die before he could finish speaking. He would only have this opportunity in his life to listen to this realization that he had exchanged his life for. Not only would he be letting himself down if he couldn't remember it, but he would also be letting Tu Qianhao down. Perhaps, Tu Qianhao would die with his eyes wide open if he couldn't remember it. The two men stood face to face. A long sword was flickering with a cold light between them. The hilt of the long sword was motionless in Gu Duxing's hand like a 10,000-year-old boulder. The tip of the long sword was still slowly soaking in blood on Tu Qianhao's chest. Forget emotions. Chu Yang would have sighed if he were here. He wouldn't have been able to describe the feeling in his heart. Tu Qianhao had become one of the 12 influential figures of the three heavens in his previous life. He had relied on his unruffled sword. Tu Qianhao had comprehended unruffled sword on the basis of the unruffled swordsmanship. Tu Qianhao had once rushed to the peak of the three heavens by relying on these two words, unruffled swordsmanship. He had slaughtered thousands of heroes and had laughed proudly in the Jianghu with his sword. This was Tu Qianhao. Tu Qianhao had gathered all his comprehensions into a book in the year of Chu Yang's death. Then, he had prepared to march into the upper three heavens. Chu Yang didn't know whether he would succeed or not. However, he knew that Tu Qianhao had written a book named Forget Emotions Heavenly Book. Now Tu Qianhao had comprehended Forget Emotions sword technique. This was undoubtedly 20 years earlier than in his previous life. However, it was worth lamenting that this Forget Emotions sword technique could no longer be used by Tu Qianhao the inventor. The Forget Emotions Heavenly Book that had once shocked the entire upper three heavens would no longer appear in the upper three heavens in this life. This was also a kind of regret. In his previous life, there were 12 influential figures in the three heavens. Mengluo Qianghua Tianrue Mengluo 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 Meng. Now the life of this black saber Qianhao evil duke had come to an end ahead of time. After a long time. Do you remember it? Tu Qianhao's voice was already weak. However, he still asked urgently. Got it. Gu Duxing took a deep breath. You read it out loud for me to hear. Tu Qianhao's pupils had already somewhat dilated. He then muttered, Will anyone think of me, Tu Qianhao, when they use the unruffled swordsmanship in the future? Unruffled sword. Gu Duxing knew that Tu Qianhao was worried, so he softly and clearly recited the sword scripture of unruffled emotions. Tu Qianhao's face exposed a strange loneliness. It seemed as if he hadn't heard what Gu Duxing had said. He merely tilted his head slightly, as if he was listening to something. Then he muttered, So boring. What? Gu Duxing hastily asked. But he didn't hear a response. He looked carefully, and saw that Tu Qianhao's body was standing upright. His eyes were full of loneliness. He was no longer breathing. The founder of the unruffled swordsmanship was one of the 12 influential figures. But his last words before his death were so boring. This was a hero of his generation who had rushed into the Jianghu. He had lived a colorful life. But his last words were so boring. No one knew. How was it boring? Why was it boring? Perhaps he had a new realization at the last moment. However, this was something that no one knew. Gu Duxing sighed. He gently pulled out his long sword. The black dragon sword left Tu Qianhao's chest like a pool of clear water. Gu Duxing retreated 2 steps. He then looked at Tu Qianhao with rapt attention. He held his sword with both hands, and bowed with a solemn expression. Then he earnestly said, Brother Tu, you can go in peace. The unruffled swordsmanship will inevitably blossom in the Jianghu. Tu Qianhao's body was still standing tall. His face was full of curly beard, and it was trembling in the bleak wind. His eyes were empty, and contained endless arrogance. But they were also lonely and desolate. Moreover, they were also full of ridicule. It seemed as if he was ridiculing his own life for being so ridiculous and helpless. But it also seemed as if he was ridiculing the millions of people who were still alive in the world for being so boring, stupid, and vulgar. His hand naturally drooped down. He still held the sword in his hand. The sword light was flickering indeterminately. He was standing like this. He was already dead. He was just a corpse. But he still had a heroic spirit of a man who could hold back 10,000 men. It was an awe-inspiring demeanor. Blood dripped down from Gu Duxing's black dragon sword. It reluctantly slid down along the sword's tip, and dripped into the dust. It splashed lightly, and the dust curled up and scattered. This is the Jianghu. Gu Duxing let out a long breath. He had been suppressing this breath for a long time. But he felt a sense of disappointment and frustration when he finally let it out. There are so many rights and wrongs in the Jianghu. But how can there be so many should and shouldn't? Life and death. Who can say for sure whether it's innocent or calm? He sighed. He then retreated a dozen steps, and stood with his hands clasped behind his back. He earnestly looked at Tu Qianhao, who had already lost his breath. The look in his eyes was extremely complicated. He then softly said, Brother Tu, the road to the underworld is long. Take care on the way. Young lord. 20 experts of the Tu clan cried out in grief. They rushed forward and threw themselves in front of Tu Qianhao. But they suddenly discovered that Tu Qianhao was no longer breathing. He was completely dead. They couldn't help but scream wildly. They turned around like a whirlwind and firmly looked at Gu Duxing. They then said in grief and indignation, "Surnamed Gu, you dared to kill our young lord?" Gu Duxing coldly looked at them. He saw that the one who had spoken was an old man with sideburns. He had tears in his eyes and was angrily looking at Gu Duxing. Gu Duxing couldn't help but coldly say, "What? Didn't Brother Tu give you an explanation before this?" Tu Qianhao had calculated everything. He had even calculated his own death. So, how could he not give an explanation to these people? Chapter 6:15. Sure enough, there was some hesitation on the faces of several people as soon as Gu Duxing said these words. They clearly remembered what Tu Qianhao had said. The bearded old man's eyes flickered. He then shouted, "Even if the young lord has given us instructions, this old man will still kill this bastard to avenge the young lord. The young lord can't die in vain." The 5 people clamored as soon as he shouted, "Yes, the young lord can't die in vain. The young lord is dead now. What face do we have to return to our clans if we don't kill the murderer Gu Duxing? We might as well kill ourselves here." The atmosphere became tense as soon as these people made a ruckus. Gu Duxing heaved a long sigh. He turned his hand, and a long sword appeared in his hand. He then sighed and said, "Brother Tu, your heroic spirit isn't far away. Watch me get rid of this evil slave for you." Tu Qianhao's eyes were still empty and lonely, but the ridicule in them seemed to have intensified. Gu Duxing knew that Tu Qianhao had shared his last realization with him. So, he certainly didn't wish for him to die. Moreover, he must have made some arrangements before this. Gu Duxing didn't know what those arrangements were, but they were certainly related to him. So, he was definitely not his enemy. Therefore, these people obviously had ulterior motives. Tu Qianhao wouldn't have allowed them to act so presumptuously if he were alive. Tu Qianhao would have killed them all given his strong personality. Tu Qianhao is dead now. But I, Gu Duxing, am still here. Tu Qianhao, I, Gu Duxing, have already recognized you as a friend when you were on the verge of death. We have always been enemies. But that doesn't prevent me from recognizing you as a friend. I know your habits and I also know your character. And I also know what you would have done if you were still here. I'll do it for you." Gu Duxing's body was dragged like a javelin. He muttered, "Brother Tu, I can see the loneliness in your eyes. And I can also see your loneliness. Now, I will use my solitary sword technique to combine with your unruffled sword technique. You and I will join forces to kill these scums." His voice hadn't faded when the sound of a golden blade cutting through the air was heard behind him. A trace of anger floated across Gu Duxing's frosty face. He straightened his body and floated forward. However, his long sword silently flew out from under his armpit. It was silent, but as fast as lightning. With this sword, his demeanor was as if he was standing at the peak of solitude, looking down on the world with disdain. It was the sword of solitude that Gu Duxing had comprehended during this period of time. With one strike, the world was in solitude. The Sword Emperor's signature move, Gu Duxing said in a low voice. Tu Qianhao, did you see that? This is the Sword of Solitude. A king-level expert was stabbed in the chest with a puff sound. His body swayed, and he fell to the ground. Gu Duxing's sword pierced right into his heart, without even looking back. But a living human life had already been reduced to nothingness. The sound of the wind rose again. Gu Duxing leaned back and gently flipped into the air. He recited, "A sword across the sky towards the peak." Then, he turned around and slashed out with his sword with a lonely and bleak expression on his face. He said indifferently, "Life and death, victory and defeat are all gone in a flash." He rushed forward, his green robe fluttering in the wind. He exuded a sense of desolation as he asked, "Where can I find a soulmate in the world?" He turned around, leaving behind dozens of afterimages. His long sword instantly turned into a screen of light. He said indifferently, "When you want to look back, you've already forgotten your feelings. Clang. Gu Duxing sheathed his sword and said indifferently, "Brother two, this is my sword of solitude. It's the last move. Half of it is the sword of solitude, and the other half is the sword of oblivion. Please advise me." For consecutive puff sounds were heard. The 4 king-level experts behind Gu Duxing fell to the ground one after another. 2 of them died on their throats, and the other 2 died on their chests. Everyone who hadn't had time to attack felt dazzled before their eyes. It seemed as if Gu Duxing was performing a light and lonely dance of solitude. The bleak mood hadn't disappeared yet, but the corpses of the 5 king-level experts who had participated in the attack were already lying on the ground. But Gu Duxing's green robe wasn't stained with blood. A sword across the sky towards the peak. Life and death, victory and defeat are all gone in a flash. Where can I find a soulmate in the world? When you want to look back, you've already forgotten your feelings. Gu Duxing heaved a long sigh of relief. The sword path problem, that had been troubling him for nearly 10 days, had finally been solved today. This made him feel that the vital energy in his body was showing signs of restlessness. It seemed as if it was slowly becoming sharper and sharper. Gu Duxing had a feeling. It seems as if the vital energy in my body is slowly transforming into vital energy. Moreover, the vital energy in my body has been constantly replenished with the continuous high-pressure training. Moreover, I've had a faint feeling of restlessness in addition to my recent realizations and breakthroughs. This gave Gu Duxing a clear feeling. My cultivation has slowly been pushed to the peak of a first-grade sword emperor, and I'm slowly advancing towards a second-grade sword emperor. Moreover, there's no bottleneck. I'm just waiting for the right conditions, and I'll become a second-grade sword trial one day. This feeling was baseless, but it really existed. The 2 4th-grade emperor-level experts of the 2 clan were about to rush forward. But the imposing aura of Gu Duxing's sword trial suddenly climbed to the peak at this time, and suddenly spread out. A formless storm of swords suddenly spread out in all directions. The sword energy was like an emperor of a generation descending to the world. The sword emperor couldn't be blasphemed. The sword supremacy couldn't be violated. The 2 4th-grade emperor-level experts' swords suddenly emitted a clang. A loud and clear sword sound rang out. It seemed as if the swords were struggling to break free from their control. They were the kings of freedom. The dignified 4th-grade emperor-level experts were almost unable to control their swords. In fact, they almost flew out of their hands. They couldn't help but turn pale with fright. Then, they fled from the side as if they were fleeing for their lives. Gu Duxing clasped his hands behind his back and slowly turned around. The look in his eyes was very strange. There was recollection, nostalgia, contemplation, and frustration. But it seemed as if there was nothing in his eyes if one looked carefully. It was an empty void. Everyone on the opposite side suddenly trembled from head to toe as soon as they came into contact with his eyes. Gu Duxing's imposing aura seemed to have changed completely at this moment. His previous sharp and indomitable imposing aura had completely changed. It had changed into half loneliness and half frustration, half loneliness and half oblivion. His upright figure gave people the feeling that he was standing at the top of the world. However, he had forgotten everything. He had forgotten all the living things in the world. Oblivion solitary guest. Yes, Gu Duxing had suddenly comprehended the word oblivion in Tu Qianhao's oblivion sword scripture, when the sword energy had been running rampant in his body. When he said the last sentence, "When I want to look back, I've already forgotten my feelings." And when he wielded his sword, Gu Duxing suddenly fused the 2 mental cultivation methods together, as if he was possessed by some supernatural force. This had caused the vital energy in his body to go berserk and transform into sword energy. He had truly comprehended it at this critical moment. Gu Duxing slowly turned around. His eyes were like lightning, and his gaze was like a sword. He looked at the 2 4th-grade emperor-level experts in silence. He was only a first-grade sword emperor. But the invisible imposing aura that he was emitting at this moment had suppressed the 2 4th-grade emperor-level experts and 13 king-level experts. The 2 emperor-level experts were obviously 3 grades higher than him in cultivation, but they couldn't help but feel timid in their hearts under his thunder-like gaze. Their complexions couldn't help but change. Their feet involuntarily retreated step by step. Gu Duxing was merely clasping his hands behind his back. But the two of them seemed as if they were facing a formidable enemy. Cold sweat had seeped out of their foreheads when they had retreated 5 steps. They felt a chill all over their bodies. Both of them had a clear feeling. Life and death aren't in my hands at this moment. It all depends on the thoughts of the sword judge opposite me. If he wants me to live, I'll live. If he wants me to die, I'll be consigned to eternal damnation. Gu Duxing looked at them with cold and clear eyes. He then indifferently said, Tu Qianhao was here before I came. How did he explain it to you? His voice was like the judgment of the gods. It couldn't be questioned. It couldn't be resisted. The two emperor-level experts suddenly felt as if a heavy mountain was pressing down on their heads. Moreover, this mountain was a mountain of swords. The curly-bearded old man's pupils contracted. He firmly shut his mouth. But the other king-level expert in the crowd said, Master once told us that if he dies by your sword today, we should return to the clan and inform the clan lord that the two clan won't come out of seclusion until. Until what? Gu Duxing's eyes turned sharp. Shut up. The curly-bearded old man finally struggled to shout. He then shouted loudly, Gu Duxing, give me your life. The sword light flashed. It broke through the blockade of Gu Duxing's imposing aura and rushed forward like a mad tiger. Gu Duxing's eyes flashed. He exposed a trace of astonishment. He coldly snorted, Get lost. The long sword seemed to fly out casually, but it was the essence of his solitary unruffled sword. Now, he needed to establish his power and shock everyone in one fell swoop. The sword light flashed high up in the sky like a bolt of lightning. The curly-bearded old man had just shouted one word when he suddenly shut his mouth. His face exposed a look of panic and despair. The next moment, his big head rolled down from his neck, fell on the ground and rolled all the way. It rolled to Tu Qianhao's feet, and finally stopped. It seemed as if he had done something wrong, and was prostrating himself in front of his young lord to admit his mistake. The other emperor-level expert was about to attack as well. But then he saw this scene, and the courage that he had just mustered disappeared without a trace. He didn't step forward. Instead, he quietly drew back 2 steps. Continue, Gu Duxing indifferently said. Until what? Young lord. Until the Master of Calamity sword changes the dynasty. Then he will appear in Jianghu again. He lowered his head after he finished speaking. His forehead was full of sweat. Gu Duxing exhaled. He couldn't help but raise his head. A long time passed. Then he silently said, You guys go. I hope that you can bring these words to your 2 clans' decision-makers. Yes. That king-level expert seemed to want to say something, but he restrained himself and lowered his head. What do you want to say? Gu Duxing indifferently asked. I want to. That king-level expert suddenly mustered his courage and loudly shouted, We weren't your match today. You and the young lord were heroes. But the young lord died in your hands after all. Our 2 clan will never forget this enmity and hatred. We will look for you one day and ask you to pay for today's blood debt. Gu Duxing was startled. Then he happily laughed out loud. He said in a gratified manner, The 2 clan is indeed a hot-blooded man. Chapter 616. Gu Duxing let out a long and loud shout. Then he suddenly jumped up. Tu Qianhao I Gu Duxing will kowtow to you if you have an afterlife. I will help you spread your sword throughout the world. Farewell. People of the 2 clan. I will wait for you to come and find me to avenge Tu Qianhao. The sword light flashed like a thunderbolt. Gu Duxing's body rushed into the mountain pass like a meteor. Then he disappeared with another flash. The remaining 4th grade emperor-level expert screamed behind him. Then his body was torn apart in an instant. Blood splashed out from his body. His face was full of incredible shock as he slowly fell down. Gu Duxing, a king-level expert angrily shouted, Why did you? Before he could finish his sentence, his mouth was covered by another person. Are you stupid? Gu Duxing has saved our lives. Do you think that this elder would be so kind as to let us go back to inform the clan after he left? Why? That person was puzzled. The 2 elders had said that they would kill Gu Duxing no matter what. They had firmly opposed the young lord when he had left those words behind. They had even incited the hearts of the people a moment ago. That person on the side heavily said. The young lord isn't holding them back now. So, how could they be willing to go back to inform the clan? One must know that Tiangong had given them a lot of purple crystals in private. I saw it with my own eyes. Are you saying that they colluded with the Tiang clan? Another person asked in astonishment. I don't know, but we must report this to the clan lord. We aren't afraid of death. But none of us would have been able to go back alive if we had fought with Gu Duxing today. But the young lord's dying words must be conveyed to the clan. If the clan wants to take revenge on Gu Duxing, then we will come out and fight with our lives on the line. Yes, let's send the young lord back first. The remaining 13 people discussed for a while. They collected the 7 corpses and made a stretcher. Then, they carefully placed Tu Qianhao's upright body on it. Then the group of people lifted it and rushed away. A long time passed. Gu Duxing's figure flashed and reappeared here. He raised his eyes and gazed at the departing group of people. He then muttered, Tu Qianhao, what a pity. Then he turned around and walked forward step by step. As he walked past the mountain pass and looked at the lush greenery in the distance, he suddenly felt his chest heat up. A beautiful figure appeared in his mind, and in that instant he felt his blood boil. This impulse had completely dispelled the melancholy that had been brought about by Tu Qianhao's death. Sister Xiao Miao, I'm back. I once told you that I want to rush into the emperor level and lead the Gu clan to glory. I also said that I would rush to the emperor level, save you and marry you. You will be my wife. Gu Duxing let out a long howl and sprinted forward. He only felt his heart getting hotter and hotter until it was boiling. His heart was so hot that it seemed like it was going to burst out of his skin. He even had the urge to take off his shirt and rush back home in the face of the strong wind. He ran faster and faster. In fact, it seemed as if a hurricane was sweeping across the earth. He was unceasingly issuing long and loud whistling sounds. He was rushing towards the Gu clan at lightning speed. Sister Xiao Miao, I'm back. Inside the Gu clan's inner residence in the garden in the lotus pond. The pond was full of lotus flowers. They were facing the autumn wind and were blooming with their fragrance. These lotus flowers turned out to be a variant of lotus flowers. People said that they were moon lotus flowers. However, the lotus flowers here were blooming in the cold wind and the moon. In the middle of the pavilion, a young girl with a graceful figure was leisurely sitting on a stool. Her beautiful hair was like the clouds. She was holding a needle and thread in her hand. She seemed to be embroidering. 2 autumn white jade lotuses were blooming in the pond beside the pavilion in front of her. The lotuses were like boats on the water's surface. Their petals were like snow. They were slim and elegant. The embroidered handkerchief in her hand was embroidered with the delicate and graceful posture of these 2 lotus flowers. 5-inch these 2 autumn white jade lotuses were the year I went out to play with my younger brother. My younger brother saw that I liked them, so he secretly brought them back and transplanted them here. Now the pond is full of autumn white jade lotuses in the blink of an eye. Only these 2 are twins. They're a pair. The young girl muttered until here. Then, her beautiful face suddenly turned red. It seemed that she had spoken the secret of her heart. So she became extremely shy for a moment. Miaoling, a steady voice was heard. An old man in a brocade robe slowly walked into the pavilion. Father. This girl was Gu Duxing's dream sweetheart, Gu Miaoling. This person was Gu Miaoling's father. He was the clan lord of the Gu clan, Gu Yunlan. Are you embroidering again? Alas, you've been embroidering these twin lotuses ever since they started to bloom. You've been embroidering them all the way till they're in full bloom. Haven't you embroidered enough? Gu Yunlan looked at his daughter with mixed feelings. His daughter had always been naughty and mischievous since she was young. She had even stolen the clan's elixirs to help Gu Duxing. In the past, Gu Yunlan would have never imagined that this daughter of his would sit quietly and embroider a flower in front of him. However, Gu Miaoling's temperament seemed to have changed since she was released from the dragon prison cave. She had begun to pay attention to the bearing of a lady. What elegance and temperament, what being a wife or mother, what being a good wife or a good husband, she had begun to study these things. This had left Gu Yinlan astonished for a long time. Only Gu Miaoling knew in her heart. I want to be little brother's wife. Since I want to be little brother's wife, I want to be the best wife in the world. I want his brothers to be envious of him. I may not be the most beautiful among his brothers' families, but I must be the best. Father, look at this lotus. It's so beautiful. Gu Miaoling gently smiled and said, You see, doesn't this look like when I braided little brother's hair and tied 2 flowers to it when he was young? Gu Yinlan was startled. He twirled his beard and nodded. Yes. However, he was puzzled in his heart. You braided Du Xing when he was young? How come I didn't know about this? Little brother has been out for a long time. I don't know how he is now. Gu Miaoling looked at the lotus in a trance. She turned her head after a long time. She looked at her father and felt her heartstrings move. She said with a sour feeling, Father, your hair is turning white very quickly. I remember when you came to see me last year. Your hair was still jet black. Gu Yinlan chuckled and said, My daughter is about to get married. How can I not be old? He thought, My hair has turned white long ago. It had turned white the moment the corpses of your 2 good-for-nothing elder brothers were brought back. Miaoling, wait until Du Xing returns. I want to make the decision to arrange a marriage between you and him. Then your father will transfer the authority of the clan to Du Xing, and I will also enjoy a few years of relaxed and happy days. What do you think? Gu Miaoling's pink face turned crimson. She slightly lowered her head and said in a slightly angry tone, Father, you have already planned it out. Why are you still asking me? Gu Yinlan chuckled and teased. I can't help but watch my daughter practice the way of a good wife and loving mother every day. Gu Miaoling blushed and pouted coquettishly. Miaoling, I have locked you up for several years. You don't have any resentment in your heart, right? Gu Yinlan hesitated for a while. Then he finally asked. Naturally, I don't have any resentment. Gu Miaoling lowered her head and replied. She thought, I don't have any resentment. On the contrary, I am somewhat grateful. I don't know when that silly goose would have understood my feelings if it hadn't been for these few years. The father and daughter were speechless. Then, they faintly heard a long whistling sound from afar. The whistling sound had already swept over a distance of several dozen kilometers. It was getting closer and closer to the ears of the 2 people. The father and daughter stood up at the same time. Gu Yinlan wrinkled his brows. He thought, why does this sound so familiar? However, Gu Miaoling's entire body started to tremble. She almost couldn't sit still. Her brocade handkerchief fell to the ground with a thud. She muttered, It's him. Little brother has returned. Hot tears suddenly gushed out of her eyes. The long whistling sound was getting closer and closer. It seemed as if this person was sprinting at full speed. He was still several dozen kilometers away a moment ago, but he was already at the clan's gate the next moment. Someone bumped into the gate with a bang. A guard's shout could be heard from afar. Young lord, you've returned. His voice was brimming with excitement. Gu Duxing seemed to smile. Then he disappeared like a gust of wind. The father and daughter in the garden only saw a thunderous swordlight flash in the air. Then it disappeared. Looking at that direction, it seemed that he was impatiently heading towards the dragon prison cave. Sure enough, an excited voice was heard the next moment. Sister Xiao Miao. Gu Miaoling's heart was filled with sweetness. Her face turned red. This silly boy. He thought that his sister Xiao Miao was suffering in the cave. Gu Yinlan snorted. He then said in a displeased manner, This evil creature. He hasn't returned for a long time. Now that he's finally back, he doesn't even pay his respects to me. He's only thinking about his sister Xiao Miao. Gu Miaoling blushed. She angrily said, Father, what are you talking about? Gu Yinlan smiled mischievously. He stroked his beard. Then he suddenly looked startled. How could that swordlight be so fast? How can a king-level expert be so fast? I'm also a 7th grade king-level expert. Gu Miaoling consoled. Father, you're thinking about the matter of cultivation. You're only 50 years old this year. A 7th grade king-level expert can be considered very good. Gu Yinlan's complexion turned black. Are you praising me? Or are you scolding me? Gu Duxing is 20 years old this year. And he has already broken through to the king-level expert. I'm over 50 years old. And a 7th grade king-level expert's aptitude is very good? Gu Yunlan's impression of Gu Duxing was the rumor that he had just broken through to the king-level expert. That was because Gu Duxing had only sent a message back at that time. Gu Miaoling's eyebrows curved. She couldn't help but smile. A shadow flashed. Gu Duxing came in with a schwa sound. He cried out in pleasant surprise, "Sister Xiao Miao, I'm back. Sister Xiao Miao, you've come out?" These words were somewhat silly. You're standing right here. Who doesn't know that you've come back? I'm right in front of you. Can't you see that I've come out? Chapter 617. Gu Miaoling pursed her lips as she looked at the young man who had suddenly appeared. She couldn't control her tears from flickering in her eyes. She felt as if her throat was blocked. She couldn't speak. She lowered her head and softly grunted. Ahem, ahem, ahem. Gu Yunlan was somewhat unhappy. He coughed a few times and thought, I'm standing here. How can I be invisible in your eyes? Ahem. Foster father, you're also here. Gu Duxing moved his eyes away from Gu Miaoling's body. He rubbed his hands and smiled awkwardly. What do you mean by I'm also here? Gu Yunlan angrily said. This is my home. Where would I go if not here? Ahem. I mean, shouldn't you be in the study room at this time? Gu Duxing hastily explained. Oh, what? Do you think I'm a hindrance? Gu Yunlan rolled his eyes. Gu Duxing, what do you mean? Gu Duxing was dumbfounded. Nothing. Nothing. Gu Yunlan angrily said. You unfilial and disobedient son. You disgraceful and evil creature. You didn't pay your respects after you came back. Instead, you called for Sister Xiao Miao. The old man snorted. His anger surged like a mountain. I'm not your foster father. But I'm still your father-in-law, right? You're so impudent. You came to my home to look for my daughter. And you said, why are you also here? Gu Duxing's face turned red. He admitted his defeat. Gu Miaoling's face turned red like a persimmon. She forcefully pushed her incoherent father. Father, you go out first. Gu Yunlan was dumbfounded. He unconsciously nodded. Okay, I'll go out first. He suddenly realized something and shouted. Daughter, you're also driving me out? Both of them had black lines on their faces. Okay, I'll go. I won't be a hindrance here. Gu Yunlan looked angry on the surface. But he was laughing in his heart. He lifted his foot and walked out. He thought, I wouldn't be here if it weren't for the fact that I haven't seen you for a long time. He walked to the exit of the pavilion. Then he casually asked, Duxing, what level are you at now? Are you a 2nd grade king level expert? He thought in his heart, it can't be that fast. He broke through to the 1st grade of king level last year. This speed is already very fast. I shouldn't be so demanding. Gu Duxing said respectfully. Fortunately, I didn't disappoint you. I'm now a 1st stage sword sovereign, and I'm about to break through to the 2nd stage. Gu Yunlan nodded as if he had expected this. Then he twirled his beard. The peak of 1st grade sword emperor isn't bad. Put in more effort, and rush into 2nd grade king level as soon as possible. I hope that you can reach emperor level within 10 years. As he spoke, he walked out of the room with steady footsteps. After taking 3 steps, his whole body suddenly trembled and stiffened. He turned around with his mouth agape. What did you just say? 1st stage sword emperor? Peak. Gu Duxing scratched his head and said somewhat puzzledly, yes. Foster father is really interesting. I'm already a 1st grade sword emperor. But he still wants me to work harder and break through to the 2nd grade king level as soon as possible. So, I have to work harder and take a step back? 1st grade sword emperor. Peak. Gu Yunlan hissed. His hand that was stroking his beard trembled and pulled out a handful of hair. His mouth and eyes were crooked. He turned his head in a daze and staggered out. Then he suddenly shouted, Sword Emperor? Then he completely sobered up. He felt a burst of confusion in his head. His body tilted, and he fell into the lotus pond with a plop. The pond water splashed everywhere. I had a dream. He said that he was a sword emperor. Gu Duxing and Gu Miaoling were shocked. They hurriedly pulled their master out of the lotus pond in a flurry. Gu Yunlan's entire body was like a drowned rat. He asked while trembling, You Are you really a sword emperor? That emperor-level sword emperor? Yes. Gu Duxing nodded seriously. Sword emperor. Gu Yinlan pushed his hand away. He walked out unsteadily in a daze. He muttered along the way, Sword emperor. Sword emperor. Sword emperor. Gu Miaoling anxiously watched her father walk out. She didn't speak for a long time. Gu Duxing wanted to speak, but he scratched his head for a long time and laughed foolishly for a long time. He didn't know what to say. Finally, Gu Miaoling asked in a low voice, Have you really become a sword emperor? How can it be fake? Gu Duxing laughed foolishly. I can deceive anyone, but not Sister Xiao Miao. Stupid. Gu Miaoling saw his silly appearance. She couldn't help but purse her lips and laugh. At this time an earth-shattering shout came from afar. Sword Emperor! It was obvious that the pitiful clan lord of the Gu clan had finally sobered up. Father has finally sobered up. Gu Miaoling's eyes moved as she happily smiled. Then, the two foolishly remained silent. After reuniting after such a long time, the two of them felt that they had a lot to say to each other. However, at this moment when they were truly facing each other, they discovered that their minds were completely blank. Forget about saying a long speech. They were unable to even say a single word. Gu Duxing scratched his head in distress. Then he rubbed his toes. Then he turned around and looked up at the sky. He opened his mouth, closed it again, and began to scratch his head again. Gu Miaoling held a brocade handkerchief in her hand. She lowered her head as if she was embroidering. But she didn't insert a needle for a long time. Her heart was beating like a little deer. Thump thump thump, thump thump thump. Cough cough cough, cough cough, cough cough. Gu Duxing couldn't stop coughing. He wanted to find a topic to talk about. But he couldn't think of one no matter how hard he tried. So he could only cough again and again. Gu Miaoling lowered her head. Her heart was beating like a little deer. She bit her lips and thought, let's see what this silly guy will say first. Cough cough. Gu Duxing finally thought of a topic. Sister Xiao Miao, are you cold? Gu Miaoling was startled. She raised her head and looked at the autumn sun. It's still very hot, okay? I'm not cold. Gu Miaoling lowered her head and said, cough cough. Then are you hot? Gu Duxing persevered and asked. I'm not hot either. Cough cough cough. Gu Duxing coughed again. He was incomparably hopeful at this moment. What if I have Chu Yang's eloquence? Or Ji Mo's and Luo Kudi's eloquence would also work. If it doesn't work, even if Tan Tan's words are out of tune, I can still easily open up the topic. He racked his brain for a long time. Then he finally thought of a topic. He said happily, Sister Xiao Miao, I found that you seem to have put on some weight. Hee hee. What? Gu Miaoling's face suddenly darkened. Put on some weight? The word fat was taboo for women. How could Gu Miaoling be an exception? Yes, yes. Gu Duxing was secretly happy. Finally, the deadlock has been broken. He nodded with absolute certainty and said, Yes, yes. It seems that your waist has also become thicker. Gu Miaoling's pretty face suddenly turned dark. Her eyebrows and the corners of her eyes gradually formed a storm. Her breathing also became heavy. Her pair of slender jade-like hands tightly pinched the brocade handkerchief. Her knuckles turned white. It seemed that the brocade handkerchief was Gu Duxing, and she was ruthlessly crushing it into several pieces. Damn it! Gu Duxing seemed to have realized that something was wrong. He hurriedly tried to remedy the situation. He carefully and dryly laughed twice. Actually, you're not that fat, just a little plump. Yes, yes, plump, hee hee. Gu Miaoling stomped her foot and stood up. She fiercely glared at him. Her face was as calm as water. She heavily stomped her foot and walked out. This stomp of her foot was really forceful. It shook the water of the lotus pond and caused ripples to appear. Gu Duxing was at a loss. He blinked his eyes in confusion. How did I offend her? Why does she look so angry? Sister Xiao Miao. He cautiously said. Don't call me. She forcefully suppressed her anger. Sister Xiao Miao. Gu Duxing innocently said. What's wrong with you? Gu Miaoling powerlessly closed her eyes and stood still. Her chest was undulating. Suddenly, she coldly turned around and looked at Gu Duxing. The corners of her mouth pulled into a smile. Little brother, have I become fat? Have I really become fat? Or have I become fat? Gu Miaoling's eyes flashed with a dangerous light. When Gu Miaoling stood up, she suddenly appeared graceful and graceful. She had a tall and slender figure with a slim waist. Her figure was perfect. Even if Chu Yang, the most picky among the brothers, was here, he wouldn't be able to find any fault with her. Gu Duxing opened his eyes wide. He felt a fragrant wind curling around him. For a moment, he felt as if he was in the clouds. He was immediately captivated and infatuated. He even thought that Sister Xiao Miao was seriously discussing a problem with him. He looked her up and down. Then, he honestly and seriously said, "Here seems to be a little fatter." As he said this, his lifeless eyes looked at Gu Miaoling's towering chest. "And here, it seems to be a little fatter." As he said this, he again looked at Sister Xiao Miao's bulging buttocks. With a bang, Gu Duxing fell into the pond. Water splashed everywhere. On the shore, Gu Miaoling retracted her foot. Her face was red as she gritted her teeth. "Pervert!" Gu Duxing awkwardly popped his head out of the lotus pond. He wiped the water droplets on his face and said with grief and indignation, "What is this? What is this?" Gu Miaoling coldly snorted. Then she stomped outside. Gu Duxing jumped out of the water and followed behind her wet. He thought to himself, no wonder Sister Xiao Miao was angry. Looking at her from behind, I can see that her big buttocks also look good when she walks. Why are you following me? Gu Miaoling's anger had yet to dissipate. This damn guy, he actually dared to call me fat. Gu Duxing was soaked in cold water. His brain also became better. He hurriedly said, "You are my wife. If I don't follow you, who should I follow? Who is your wife?" Gu Miaoling's face suddenly turned red. Her body seemed to have gone limp. She weakly resisted. I didn't agree." Gu Duxing didn't say anything. The two of them walked silently, one in front and one behind. Seeing that they were about to reach Gu Miaoling's boudoir, Gu Miaoling finally stopped. "You just came back. There are so many things at home. Why aren't you going to deal with them? Why are you following me? Besides, your body is wet. Why aren't you changing your clothes?" As she said this, she felt a bit of heartache. "How am I wet? Isn't this very dry?" Gu Duxing said. He was now a sword emperor. It was easy for him to circulate his energy to dry a piece of clothing. Gu Miaoling was dumbfounded. Seeing that his clothes were indeed dry, she couldn't help but smile and said, "Go quickly. Father is definitely waiting for you." "No, I want to talk to you first before going." Gu Duxing's eyes flashed with affection. "Sister Xiao Miao, you don't know how much I have missed you all these years. I didn't sleep for a day and a night. Finally, I wrote 4 chapters. Sure enough, I can't keep them. I have to post them all. I will continue to write tomorrow. There will be an update at night. Today is a huge explosion. Looking for monthly votes. Double. It has already begun. Brothers and sisters, please support." Chapter 618. Gu Miaoling's eyes became hazy and tears almost flowed out. Unknowingly, the two of them silently held each other's hands. Gu Miaoling and Gu Duxing had always had a hazy and strange brother-sister relationship. Gu Miaoling had always treated Gu Duxing as her younger brother. She had always taken care of and cared for him in every possible way. Later on, she had unreservedly given her heart to him. But Gu Duxing had been ignorant and unaware of it at that time. He didn't know that his sister Xiao Miao's ideal lover was actually him. Then, before Gu Duxing could react, Gu Miaoling helped Gu Duxing to cultivate and steal elixirs. She incurred the wrath of the clan and was imprisoned in the dragon prison cave. When Gu Duxing finally understood Sister Xiao Miao's deep feelings for him, it was already too late for regrets. At that time, he didn't even have the qualifications to visit Gu Miaoling, and the clan wanted to arrange a marriage for him. Gu Duxing had no choice but to run away from home and meet Chu Yang. After that, after going through many twists and turns, he returned for 3 days. Finally, his strength improved by leaps and bounds, and he obtained the approval of the clan. Then he went to visit Gu Miaoling. The meeting in front of the dragon prison cave was the first time this pair of man and woman met after they understood each other's feelings, and understood each other's feelings. But it was a world of ice and snow. and the two of them were haggard. And that time, there were ice-cold iron bars hindering them. That parting lasted for more than a year. But that meeting was the time when the two of them pledged their love for each other. It wasn't until today that these two lovers could finally hold hands without any misgivings. For the first time in their lives, when the two of them held hands and walked along this road, their hearts were filled with mixed feelings. Gu Miaoling recalled that time when her legs were broken, and she was imprisoned in the dragon prison cave, before her injuries healed. All these years in the dragon prison cave, she suffered a fate worse than death. If it wasn't for her concern for Gu Duxing, she would have been disheartened and committed suicide. In the dragon prison cave where even the human heart was frozen, her entire body was stiff. The only warmth in her heart was her little brother, Gu Duxing. The heavens took pity on her. Today the two of them finally met. Gu Miaoling's vision blurred as she thought about it. Fortunately, the heavens have taken pity on me. I finally obtained it. I can finally stand shoulder to shoulder with little brother under the sun. As Gu Duxing walked, he was also thinking about how insensible he had been these past few years. How stupid and slow he had been. Sister Xiao Miao had already given her maiden heart to him without any reservations. But he had stubbornly waited until Sister Xiao Miao was locked up before he finally woke up and understood. During those years, he felt as if a knife was being twisted in his heart every day and every night. Even in Wanwan's dreams, Sister Xiao Miao was calling her little brother. She was happy in her dreams. But when she woke up, she was heartbroken before this. The two of them didn't have any vows of undying love. So much so that they didn't even know of each other's feelings. However, it was during these few years that Gu Miaoling was imprisoned in the dragon prison cave that the two of them became truly unswerving. Gu Duxing was Gu Miaoling's only spiritual support in her suffering. Gu Miaoling's heart was already secretly in love with him. Moreover, she had experienced an intense yearning for him over the past few years. So, her feelings had become even more intense than metal and stone. As for Gu Duxing's regrets over the past few years, the guilt and the painful torment in his heart had also made him deeply in love with Gu Miaoling. He no longer thought of a second person, although the two of them didn't have any vows of undying love. But the feelings between the two of them had already reached such a stage that even thunder couldn't shake them. It could be said that the experience in the dragon prison cave had directly promoted this relationship. It had promoted a pair of lovers to be together for life. But how many lovers in this world could endure such torment? It wasn't easy for the two of them to be where they were today. It wasn't easy at all. If this experience were to be told to others, perhaps all the lovers in the world would cry and give them their blessings. Gratified, the two of them held hands and slowly walked into the embroidery building. They both felt as if their feet were floating, as if they were in the clouds. Their minds were in a mess, as if they were in a dream. How difficult was this happiness to come by? Sister Xiao Miao. Gu Duxing's voice was trembling. Gu Miaoling lowered her head and softly replied. She only felt her heart beating faster and faster. I missed you so much. Gu Duxing murmured. The steel-like cold-faced swordsman, at this moment, not only was his voice trembling, but his eyes were also suddenly wet. He only felt the sweetness, bitterness, and saltiness in his heart at the same time. He was obviously very happy, but he couldn't help but want to cry. There was also a kind of heartache and palpitating feeling. He was afraid that what he had now was just a dream, because all of this was so beautiful that it was unreal. Me too, Gu Miaoling softly replied. These past few years, I've always been thinking, if my little brother would be bullied outside, if he would suffer grievances, but no one would be able to talk to him, if he would miss me. Gu Miaoling said as if she was in a dream. She looked at Gu Duxing in a daze and murmured, Little brother, you've lost a lot of weight. Gu Duxing only felt his blood boiling. He couldn't hold it back anymore. He roared in a low voice and finally took a step forward. He reached out his trembling hands and tentatively pulled the delicate body in front of him into his arms. He felt Gu Miaoling's body tremble, but she didn't resist. Instead, she gently snuggled up to him. Gu Duxing then tentatively tightened his hands step by step until there was no gap between the two of them. Suddenly, His heart was filled with satisfaction. Gu Miaoling softly let out a little sound, as if she was sighing in her throat. Her body stiffened for a moment, and then completely relaxed. She gave herself to the man beside her. It had nothing to do with lust. It was only about a woman's wholehearted devotion. Gu Duxing's heart warmed up. Suddenly a warm current surged up. He didn't care about anything else. He stretched out his head and kissed Gu Miaoling's sparkling earlobe. Gu Miaoling let out a moan, and her body went soft. She only felt that overbearing big mouth had already covered her soft lips. Gu Miaoling's mind exploded. It was as if a galaxy in her mind had suddenly exploded. She drifted and didn't know anything. When she regained her consciousness, she found that she had been carried to the bed by her little brother. A strong and sturdy body was tightly pressed against her body. The heat from his skin made her flustered. A pair of mischievous big hands had already reached into her lapel. She looked at her body again. She didn't know when, but she was already half naked. Little brother, don't do this. Gu Miaoling weakly struggled to resist. Gu Duxing leaned on her body and murmured, Sister Xiao Miao, I like you so much. The current Gu Duxing didn't have the cold-faced swordsman of the martial world. He also didn't have the slightest trace of the supreme demeanor of a sword emperor. There was only a man who deeply loved the woman in front of him. Only in front of her could he be completely relaxed. Now in the midst of the impulsive lust, he was completely relaxed and warm. He was like an affectionate young man who was entangled with his lover. He was also like a little brother who was indulging in his impudence in front of his big sister. This kind of feeling was a mixture of familial love, a mixture of deep love, and a mixture of deep love between siblings. It was really indescribable. But at this moment, both of them felt that the other person was their strongest support in this world. Gu Miaoling resisted the numbness and arousal of her body with great difficulty. She tried her best to push Gu Duxing's head away from her chest. She said while gasping for breath, Wait. Tell me about your experiences these past few years, tell me. My experiences in these few years? Gu Duxing's mind became clear. He said, What experiences? I want to know how my little brother survived these few years without Sister Xiao Miao by his side. Gu Miaoling looked at him affectionately. Her slender jade-like hands gently combed his hair. She said with infinite pity, We are all people who practice martial arts. Of course I know how difficult it is to break through from martial great master to sword revered master, then from sword revered master to sword king, and from sword king to the peak of first-grade sword emperor. This is a path that even a talented martial artist can't complete in his lifetime. But you to reach this step, you only used 2 years. Gu Miaoling suddenly wanted to cry. She choked. How did you do it? How much did you suffer? The more she thought about it, the more sorrowful she felt. Tears streamed down her face. For your sister Xiao Miao. Did you risk your life? You little fool. No. I just worked harder than ordinary people. Gu Duxing recalled his experiences in the past few years, and also had mixed feelings. I have a few brothers. We all improved very quickly, because we promised to create a legend of the heavens together. Everyone didn't dare to slack off. Everyone practiced like this. We practiced together during the day, and practiced together at night. After practicing at night, we would lie in bed and practice secretly. It wasn't hard. Instead, it was very happy. Brother. Gu Miaoling looked pensive. She asked, Is it the person who gave me the fire essence? Yes, that's my big brother. Gu Duxing's spirit was lifted when she mentioned Chu Yang. He said, My rapid improvement is due to my big brother's contribution. The other brothers are also the same. Gu Miaoling's beautiful eyes flashed with gratitude. She said, Little brother, you must not let your brother down. If it wasn't for him, I'm afraid I wouldn't have been able to last long in that dragon prison cave. Yes. Gu Duxing hugged Gu Miaoling tightly as his heart ached. Then he began to talk about his experiences in the past 2 years. To Gu Miaoling's surprise, Gu Duxing's narration didn't have the kind of repressed despair that she had imagined. As Gu Duxing narrated, Gu Miaoling felt that she saw these people. Chu Yang was calm, wise and multi-talented. Dong Wuxiang was calm and majestic like a mountain. GMO was humorous but lazy. Luo Kudi acted recklessly without using his brain, but was warm-hearted. Rui Butong was usually shifty-eyed and as light as a swallow, but was loyal to his friends. Tan Tan was super narcissistic. Each of them appeared vividly in front of Gu Miaoling's eyes as Gu Duxing narrated. Chapter 619. I really envy you. I can finally rest assured. You have so many good brothers. Gu Miaoling said softly. When I see them, I must thank them properly. Thank them for taking good care of my little brother during my absence. Little brother. Gu Duxing was somewhat unwilling. He turned over and said in front of her face, Sister Xiao Miao, didn't you hear what foster father said? He has already agreed to our matter. I will be your husband in the future, the head of the family. How can you still call me little brother? Can you change the way you address me? Change the way I address you? Gu Miaoling grabbed his hand and said with a smile that was not a smile. Change what way? This. You can call me husband. No, these two words remind me of that little wolf Luo Kudi. Gu Duxing scratched his head. How about you call me husband? He thought about it, and still felt a little mushy. How about you call me? Duxing, how about it? That's too intimate. Gu Miaoling used her fingers to play with her long hair, ignoring him. Then what do you want me to call you? Gu Duxing asked hopefully. I remember when you were young. I always called you Duxing doggy. Gu Miaoling looked at Gu Duxing and narrowed her eyes. How about? I use it again? Don't. Gu Duxing's head was covered in cold sweat. If he was called out and passed to the ears of his brothers, he would not be able to raise his head in this lifetime. He finally gave up dejectedly. Then you should call me little brother. He thought about it and objected again. Just call me little brother. Little brother won't do. This time, it was Gu Miaoling's turn to be surprised. She opened her round eyes wide. Why not? Cough cough. Gu Duxing coughed twice and whispered something in Gu Miaoling's ear. Poof. Gu Duxing's buttocks got kicked off the bed. Gu Miaoling was lying on the bed with her face flushed red. She glared at Gu Duxing with a fiendish look in her eyes. Well done, Gu Duxing. Not bad, not bad. Come, tell me the truth. How did you flirt with girls? I didn't. Gu Duxing rubbed his aching butt and cried out in injustice. You do. Gu Miaoling's almond-shaped eyes opened wide, as she made an unreasonable accusation. Gu Duxing was so anxious that sweat appeared on his forehead. He bowed and swore an oath. It was only after a long time that he was forgiven. Wiping away his cold sweat, he climbed back onto the bed again. In fact, this one-track-minded guy didn't know that Gu Miaoling wasn't angry at all. She was just flirting with him, that's all. But Gu Duxing was so nervous that his heart was thumping for a while. It was as if he had seen the time when he was young again. Sister Xiao Miao had pulled his ear and fiercely asked, Lone dog, where did you go just now? If you don't tell me the truth, I'll whip your ass. He couldn't help but feel a sharp pain in his butt. Over the years, Gu Duxing still needed time to digest the power he had accumulated over the years. Gu Miaoling saw that he was so honest. Her joke was like the sky had collapsed. She couldn't bear to bully him anymore. So she snuggled into his embrace and happily narrowed her eyes. The two of them were long-winded and seemed to have endless things to say. Once Gu Duxing opened his mouth, he actually talked nonstop. Even if he added up all the words he had spoken with Chu Yang and the others, it wouldn't be as much as half a day today. Gu Miaoling listened with a smile on her face. Every now and then, she would interject a sentence to express her opinion. In fact, she was saying, Go on, I like to hear you talk. After a long time, Gu Duxing was still talking nonstop. But Gu Miaoling finally stopped him in a gentle manner. She softly said, Little brother, you, quickly go to the front hall. Father and the others are waiting for you. Be good, be obedient. Gu Duxing reluctantly lifted his head from her body. His eyes sparkled as he looked at her. He reluctantly said, Sister Xiao Miao, then will you wait for me here? Wait for you for what? Gu Miaoling pointed a finger at his forehead. Biting her lips, she said, Lone dog, you little rascal. Gu Duxing laughed foolishly and jumped up. Gu Miaoling anxiously shouted behind him, Put on your clothes. Put on your clothes properly, you little fool. Gu Duxing hurriedly tidied himself up. Gu Miaoling sighed. She covered her lapel, and got down from the bed. She came in front of him and carefully tidied him up. Her eyes were overflowing with tenderness. Go on. Gu Miaoling retreated a few steps. After she was satisfied, she finally let him go. Gu Duxing continued to laugh foolishly. He was infinitely satisfied. Outside the door a cool breeze blew. Gu Duxing only felt refreshed. The wind blew under his armpits. He walked out lightly. He only felt that the joys of life were nothing more than this. The happiest day of his life was none other than today. He skipped and jumped as he rushed to the meeting hall. He ignored the surprised gazes of the guards around him. He was in high spirits and wild with joy. Behind him, the eyes of countless guards fell to the ground. They didn't dare to believe their own eyes. Damn, what did I just see? Is this still our cold-faced and unapproachable young lord? He looks more innocent than a 7 or 8-year-old child. When he arrived at the meeting hall, he saw that the room was filled with people waiting for him. Everyone's expression was strange. They looked at him as if they wanted to eat him up. Foster father Gu Yinlan's expression was even stranger. That kind of expression made Gu Duxing and the others jump in fright. They had a hair-raising feeling. It was as if he had stolen a treasure that he had kept for more than 20 years. Moreover, he didn't want to return it. That kind of feeling. There was even a sense of bitterness and deep hatred. There was also a kind of anger and jealousy that couldn't be explained clearly. Cough, cough. Gu Duxing was somewhat embarrassed. Foster father, why are you looking at me like that? Your expression is very strange. He jumped in fright the moment he spoke. Why is my voice hoarse? What's wrong with your voice? Gu Yinlan asked in a strange tone. Hoarse? You weren't hoarse just now, right? He pointed to the sky. It wasn't even morning when you came back. Now the sun is setting in the west. You haven't stopped talking these few hours? The more he looked at this guy, the more he disliked him. The daughter that he had raised for more than 20 years is about to be eaten up by this guy. It's really... Alas, alas, everyone burst into laughter. One of the elders stroked his beard and joked. This? Patriarch, please don't be angry. Presumably, the young patriarch of this generation has not spoken as much as he did today. It's pardonable that his throat is hoarse. Gu Duxing was completely speechless. Okay, let's get down to business. The great elder stood up to smooth things over. Then he looked at Gu Duxing with bright eyes. Young clan master, are you really a first-grade sword sovereign now? Gu Duxing nodded. It was useless to say more. What was important was to see action and facts. He opened his shoulders. Instantly, the aura of a sword sovereign gushed out like a tide. It was incomparably sharp and mighty. In the hall, no matter who it was, the sword at their waist immediately let out a loud and clear sword cry. It was as if all the swords were expressing their allegiance to a sword sovereign at the same time. Sword sovereign. The indisputable aura of a sovereign. The great elder was shocked. Then his eyes suddenly shot out a look of ecstasy. Everyone behind him was shocked with a loud rumble. Everyone was indescribably excited. They looked at Gu Duxing, as if they were looking at a living immortal. The Gu clan finally had an emperor-level expert. Moreover, it was a sword sovereign who had never appeared in the 3 heavens in the last 1,000 years. Many people's eyes were brimming with tears of excitement. They almost had the impulse to worship their ancestors. Old ancestor, our Gu clan, finally has roots. We finally have someone to rely on. Our Gu clan can finally straighten our backs from now on. Many people couldn't help but use their sleeves to wipe their eyes as they thought of the sufferings of these years. Everyone was smiling, but it could be faintly seen that everyone's eyes were glistening with tears. Even the usually calm clan master Gu Yinlan's eyes were moist. He kept taking deep breaths to control himself. But his body was still gently trembling. An emperor-level expert had appeared in the Gu clan. This had always been the biggest extravagant hope of the Gu clan. The Gu clan had always been unstable. The clan didn't have an emperor-level expert to keep watch. So they didn't feel strong when they went out. They had to be careful when doing things. They were afraid that they would provoke this and that, and bring disaster to the clan. The people of the Gu clan had been living with their tails between their legs these years. They had been sullen to the point that they were about to go crazy. Gu Miaoling was the daughter of the clan master. But she had only stolen a stock of elixir. and she had incurred the wrath of the entire clan. In fact, they had even locked her up in the cruel dragon prison cave. The reason for this was because of the 2 words emperor-level expert. The clan's foundation wouldn't be affected if a younger brother died. But the clan didn't have an expert to keep watch. So, the entire clan would be consigned to eternal damnation if they offended a powerful force. And Gu Miaoling's willfulness had hindered the promotion of an emperor-level expert. So, how could they not be angry? And Gu Duxing had realized this illusory hope. In fact, he had far exceeded everyone's expectations. There were many emperor-level experts in the 3 heavens. Apart from the Gu clan, there were also emperor-level experts in the other clans. It could be said that emperor-level experts were rare in the Gu clan, but they weren't rare in the 3 heavens. But what about sword emperors? How many sword emperors were there in the 3 heavens? Moreover, they were pure sword emperors who could emit the aura of an emperor. Only Gu Duxing had appeared in the last 1,000 years, and he was the only one. The Gu clan was in an uproar as Sword Emperor Gu Duxing released his aura. This atmosphere was 100 times livelier than the New Year's. Everyone had forgotten about Gu Miaoling's mistake in this festive atmosphere. In fact, they didn't even mention it. Even some of the people who had been dissatisfied with Gu Yinlan's release of Gu Miaoling were beaming with joy at this moment. The adversity that the Gu clan had faced over the past few years had already twisted everyone in the clan into a rope. Everyone was working hard for the sake of the clan. Chapter 620. Someone once said that the strongest fighting strength of the Gu clan was its cohesiveness. Otherwise, the Gu clan would have ceased to exist long ago. However, it was precisely because of this that such a clan could erupt with unimaginable power, once it had a powerful leader. A fist could create a crater in a vast desert that spanned tens of thousands of miles. This was because the fist was clenched together. The desert was big, but it was scattered sand. This was the power of the Gu clan. A king-level expert jokingly laughed and said, "It seems that it's all thanks to young Mississippi. If young Miss wasn't in the dragon prison cave, young clan lord wouldn't have been so desperate. He broke through from martial great master to sword emperor in 2 years. He's the only one in the entire heaven since ancient times." Everyone couldn't help but laugh when they heard this. However, Gu Duxing's complexion slowly turned cold when he heard this. It gradually became as cold as ice. He couldn't accept the fact that Gu Miaoling had been in the dragon prison cave for a long time. He couldn't even mention it in a joke. Gu Duxing's eyes turned cold. He slowly said, "I don't want anyone to mention this matter again. The dragon prison cave must be destroyed. If anyone dares to mention it again, don't blame me for not giving face." Gu Duxing became angry. Suddenly, the entire hall was filled with awe-inspiring sword energy. That king-level expert felt a chill in his heart. His complexion turned deathly pale. Gu Duxing knew that he was only joking. He didn't have any evil intentions. So, he took a deep breath and suppressed the anger in his heart. Then he insipidly said, "Actually, I'd rather be nothing. I'd rather be a beggar. I don't want Sister Xiao Miao to suffer those years of pain. If I can abolish my cultivation as a sword emperor in exchange for that painful experience in Sister Xiao Miao's life, then I, Gu Duxing, won't hesitate." He gently looked around. Then he deeply bowed and said, "So, I don't want to hear about this matter again. I hope that everyone will respect my decision." Gu Duxing's words were extremely impolite, but everyone felt deep veneration for him. There had been countless heroes since ancient times. Who would be willing to make such a sacrifice for his woman? Even if it was just words, it was still very rare. The status of women in the heaven continent was low, but Gu Duxing had said it, and everyone believed that if this matter was really feasible, Gu Duxing would not hesitate at all, because he was willing to break through to Sword Emperor in 2 years for Gu Miaoling. Even if he was willing to cripple himself in an instant for Gu Miaoling, as long as Gu Miaoling needed it. Everyone knew how much effort one had to put in to break through to the Sword Emperor realm within 2 years. That was definitely not any better than the feeling of being dismembered every day for the past 2 years. Gu Duxing did it. Although he didn't say it, they were all martial artists. Who wouldn't be able to imagine the hellish feeling? Therefore, No one doubted the sincerity of Gu Duxing's words at this moment. This cold-faced young man, for his love, could ignite a fire that could burn the heavens and earth at any time. Even if he burned himself to ashes, he would not regret it. He could do it. Gu Yinlan's eyes lit up. He felt gratified in his heart. For Gu Duxing to be able to say such words, it was enough to show that his daughter did not entrust her life to the wrong person. He could finally rest assured. At this point, the discomfort in Gu Yinlan's heart completely disappeared. Gu Miaoling was his daughter after all. His daughter was going to get married when she grew up. As a parent, he felt anxious, reluctant, and indignant at this time. Even if his son-in-law was his righteous son, he still couldn't dispel this feeling. This was an extremely strange and contradictory state of mind for a father. He hoped that his daughter would be happy. He hoped that his daughter would live her life as soon as possible. But he didn't want his daughter to get married. But what else could Gu Yinlan say after hearing Gu Duxing's words? He turned his back and wiped the corners of his eyes when no one was paying attention. Then, he silently said in his heart, "Mother of the child, our son is no longer here. But our daughter can obtain the greatest happiness a woman can obtain. Moreover, our son-in-law is a man who values affection and righteousness. He is our righteous son. There is no difference between him and our son. You can rest assured. I will have a good chat with you when we go back tonight. I will have a good drink with you. We may be separated in the netherworld, but I know that you can feel it. I remember that you held my hand tightly when you passed away. You couldn't say a word. I know that you were worried. I know. I hope that you will teach our son a good lesson in the netherworld. Don't let them be debauches like they were when they were alive." Gu Yinlan wiped his eyes and turned around. He smiled and looked at Gu Duxing. He felt the joyous atmosphere, and said in his heart, "Mother of the child, it would be great if you were by my side at this moment. Then, I would have no more regrets in this life. I remember that you were always angry and jealous at that time. But did you know that ever since you passed away, I have never looked at another woman in the eye? Every night, I can't sleep well. In my dreams, I would drink with you in front of your portrait. I miss you so much." Duxing can do for Gu Miaoling. I can do the same for you. Can you feel it? Gu Yinlan quietly walked out of the hall amidst the jubilation. The laughter behind him gradually became more and more distant, until it couldn't be heard anymore. Gu Yinlan was in his bedroom not long after. He raised a pot of wine and looked at the portrait on the wall. He smiled and said, "Ling Er, today is a big day. They are celebrating. I also want to celebrate with you. I can't drink without you on this big day. I want to get drunk with you today." He looked at the portrait for a long time. Then he raised his head and drank the wine in one gulp. There was an incense burner in front of the portrait. Green smoke was rising in spirals. A cup of wine was as calm as still water. A pair of chopsticks was upright. There was a young woman in the portrait. She had a gentle face. Her clothes were fluttering in the wind. Her eyes were full of worry and reluctance. She seemed to be quietly looking at the white-haired man in front of her. She seemed to be consoling him. She seemed to be sighing. She seemed to be crying. Cheers. Gu Yinlan closed his eyes and drank another cup. "I can finally put down the burden on my shoulders after today. I will be with you from now on. You didn't like it when I was busy every day. You said that I didn't have time to accompany you. But I can finally accompany you every day from now on. You didn't like it when I drank. But you would sit quietly on the side every time I drank. You would fill my cup. Your eyes would be full of helplessness. I want to look at you one more time. I want you to pour me another cup of wine. Ling Er, I miss you so much." Gu Yinlan murmured. He drank one cup of wine after another. But his eyes were closed the whole time. That was because he could feel his beloved wife by his side. She was pouring wine for him. She was worried about him. But she was looking at him tenderly. He was afraid that he would see that cold portrait again if he opened his eyes. His nose seemed to smell a vaguely familiar fragrance a long time past. Then, the wine pot fell to the ground with a bang. Gu Yinlan slowly leaned on the table. He closed his eyes and fell asleep. "Ling Er, is she okay over there?" he murmured. A gust of wind blew in through the window, and the portrait fluttered in the air. It seemed that the woman in the portrait was anxiously looking at her man. She couldn't wait to come out of the portrait and cover him with clothes. The night wind was chilly. In the following days, the Gu clan announced to the public, Clan Lord Gu Yinlan will retire. He will live in seclusion behind the scenes. He won't get involved in the clan's affairs from now on. The new clan lord will be the former young clan lord of the Gu clan, Gu Duxing. From now on, the Gu clan will have a change of dynasty. The new clan lord, Gu Duxing, will have absolute supreme authority in the Gu clan. This announcement is hereby made to the world. Due to the current turmoil in Jianghu, we will invite the people of Jianghu to hold a grand ceremony for the new clan lord. At the same time, there is another announcement. The new clan lord of the Gu clan, Gu Duxing, will exchange betrothal gifts with the former clan lord's eldest daughter, Gu Miaoling. Similarly, the marriage will be officially consummated after the turmoil in Jianghu subsides. In other words, Gu Duxing has a bountiful harvest in both his career and love. If you add in his limitless future, then he will have a bountiful harvest. While Gu Duxing was returning to the Gu clan, Chu Yang had also finally arrived at the Mo clan. Hearing that King of Hell Chu had arrived, Mo Tianji rushed out to welcome him. He held Chu Yang's hand tightly and shook it repeatedly. It's great that you're here. I was worried that no one would talk to me. Chu Yang pulled his hand back and stared at Mo Tianji. He said vigilantly, You can talk to me if you have good things to talk about. But if it's bad things, then don't talk about it. Mo Tianji was stunned. How can this guy be so shrewd? He didn't know that Chu Yang was shrewd. But today he wasn't shrewd. He was experienced. In his previous life, the two of them were very close. Chu Yang was very clear about Mo Tianji's habits. This understanding included Mo Tianji's reaction when his eyebrows moved to the upper left corner, and the reason why his eyebrows moved to the upper right corner. In other words, if you raise your butt, I will know if you want to shit or fart. With such a deep understanding, how could Chu Yang be fooled by Mo Tianji's apparent enthusiasm? Mo Tianji only had a superficial understanding of Chu Yang in this life. But Chu Yang had studied Mo Tianji for 2 lifetimes. It could be said that Chu Yang's understanding of Mo Tianji had reached the point of authority. If this was a subject, Chu Yang could be called a great master, the kind that had never been seen before. For example, some of Mo Tianji's habits. If Mo Tianji had a card up his sleeve, his unhurried attitude could make a person with the best self-restraint vomit blood and die. Mo Tianji's enthusiasm and familiarity at first sight made Chu Yang feel that there was a conspiracy behind it. Moreover, this guy wants to use me. Therefore, before Mo Tianji could open his mouth, Chu Yang had already sealed the door. No matter how many tricks you have, I will not move. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support. And don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.